Farms and wilderness are the focus of today's stories. Prepare for creatures that lurk in these remote places that appear to savor the pain in your eyes as they torment you and your friends. So find your nearest local abandoned farm and bring some camping gear. It's time to enjoy these terrifying and allegedly true stories. And hey, don't forget to send me your scary trucker stories soon at darkstories.org so I can narrate them. And check out eeriecast.com for more creepy podcasts. Now, let's begin. Flesh pedestrian sighting in Northwest USA. From K. Salami. I think we all fell into weird research phases during quarantine. I know I did. I had such boredom I began to research Native American folklore. I've always had a vast appreciation for Native American culture and a large obsession with cryptids and horror. My boyfriend is Native American. He's taught me a lot about his culture, but I wanted to learn more about their horror stories. I stumbled upon one of the most common cryptids in Native American folklore, the flesh pedestrian. Some of you may not be familiar with this particular title for the creature. I suggest looking it up, but don't think too hard and long about it, and don't say its name out loud. This is what I was taught by my boyfriend. He also advised me not to look too deep into their history and to avoid obsessive reading about this specific creature. That didn't work. I couldn't stop listening to stories about it, reading about their origins, what makes them who rather than what they are. Either way, the story I came here to tell begins at night. I'd been lying in bed reading r/no sleep when my boyfriend texted me. He asked if I wanted to go over to his brother's house. I responded, sure, why not? He and his friend drove back into town from the rural farmhouse to pick me up and grab a pizza for us. We laughed and joked on our way back to the farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. Eventually, we made it to the road his brother lived on. We made the right-hand turn and the headlights drifted over the darkened cornfield, illuminating it. But in the middle of the field stood a tall, pale figure, hunched over, its back to us. My heart sank. My boyfriend and I instantly knew what had found us. However, our friend did not. He began to exclaim at the sight of the being. Holy crap! Did you guys see that? Why aren't you reacting to that thing? At which point I told him very quickly and in a stern voice, listen, that thing you just saw, you've got to stop thinking about it, talking about it, and don't go looking for it in that field. We're to act like nothing happened. We're going into the barn, closing the door, eating, and working on the truck. The barn doors are to stay closed, and we only open them if we know who's on the other side. He looked at me as though I had just spun my head backwards like The Exorcist. What the heck are you even talking about? What's the big deal? He asked. All I could say to that was, please just listen to me and trust me on this. After the ground rules were laid down, the rest of the night goes on and we almost forget about what happened. Almost. A while later, after a couple of beers, I needed to use the restroom, and I wasn't too keen on doing it outside. So I asked my boyfriend to accompany me into the empty farmhouse so I could use the facilities. His brother was at work at the time, and his brother's dog was at his grandparents' house about 20 minutes away. We walk up to the dark, silent house without incident. Quickly, I used the bathroom. When I was done, my boyfriend raided the fridge for anything worth eating. I wandered the empty, quiet bachelor pad. I looked through the kitchen window, and I noticed a light bouncing around behind the barn about 10 yards into the farm field. Who or what the heck was out there? I freaked out, calling my friend who had been left in the barn. I see the light move up to his head as he answers the phone. He was out there with his phone light on, looking around. I demanded to know what the heck he was doing, considering the strict list of rules I'd given him after the incident in the car. Yeah, I know, but I swear I could have seen Ripley in the field. Ripley is the name of my boyfriend's brother's dog that wasn't supposed to be home. The dog was most assuredly with her grandparents 20 minutes away from home. All of this was known by the friend. In complete awe, I told him to head back to the barn. We then met at the entrance and walked back in together. I asked what the heck he was doing. He explained, "I went outside to use the bathroom, and as I was doing so, I saw something moving around in the field. I couldn't help but think it was Ripley, and I felt the need to go after her and get her. But after you called, it was like I snapped out of a trance, realizing Ripley wasn't here. But I already knew that before I even went to the bathroom. It was so strange." At this point, my boyfriend and I are darn near in hysterics. We peeled out of the driveway so darn fast. As we left, I told our friend to just forget about what happened and to not bring it up again tonight. When we were gone and safe, I eventually explained to him that I think he had been lured out to the field by a flesh pedestrian, which had intended to separate him from us using the illusion of the dog our friend was familiar with. Our friend, if he had gotten far enough away from us, it would have attacked him. Our friend thought I was completely insane. However, this still chills me to the bone. I knew the consequences of researching these creatures. I'd been reading and listening to stories of those who had been in the presence of them for days at that point. I can confidently say that nothing good can come of it. Beware of these creatures, for if I hadn't educated myself, I'm sure my friend could have been prey that night. Our next story today is an update to a previous story from almost a year ago. So to make sure everything makes sense, I'm going to go ahead and add the original story here. Then after that, I'll go ahead and read the update. Enjoy. Hayfield Stalker from Crepuscular Creature. It was around the beginning of October of 2020 when I first saw it. I was sitting outside with the cats. I live on a small farm in West Michigan, and my uncle had planted a new hayfield that summer. We'd seen plenty of coyote, a bobcat or two, and even a few cougars, but nothing like this. As I was sitting outside with the cats, my eyes wandered to the cows in the pasture, who were acting strange. They were huddled in a protective circle with the younger ones in the middle, as if they sensed a danger or a storm coming. I was about to go in the house and tell my grandma, but that's when I saw it. This creature was stalking across the new hayfield. Its body and stride reminded me of a coyote, but it had an oddly long tail and small big cat-like ears. I was confused by the build of it, but what confused me more was the coloration. This creature was pure black. I instantly thought it was melanistic, which is basically the opposite of albinism. The animal stalked to one end of the hayfield before turning and walking back to the other, disappearing in the tall grass before reappearing a short time later and doing the same thing over and over again. It just continued to pace as I watched it, adding to the confusion of it all. Now I did find an odd paw print in the driveway, which leads to the new hayfield near the beginning of spring. It looked like a cougar paw print, but the shape was off and the claws were visible and looked similar to a canine's. This paw print showed qualities of a feline and canine, which was very confusing since a crossbreed between the two was impossible. When the creature didn't reappear after heading into the tall grass at the side of the field for the final time, I went inside and told my grandma, who didn't think much of it unless it was posing a threat to us or our animals. I saw the creature pacing back and forth every few nights. It happened so often the cows got used to it and no longer huddled together. I think my grandma saw it one night because I wasn't allowed to go outside at night anymore, which bummed me out. I did try and get a picture of it one night, but my phone camera doesn't zoom in that much, and all the pictures were blurry, causing the creature to look like a blurry black dot against a chaotic green background. I'm unsure of what it is still, but I'm not willing to go out there and find out. Update. It came back. From Crepuscular Creature. You may recall the previous story I submitted about the creature in the hayfield. Well, it had disappeared for some time, and nothing else came of the situation. So I thought it left for good, or maybe it was even killed by someone during hunting season or in defense of livestock. I was clearly wrong. It was a cool morning in the early spring of 2022. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, the cows were still lying down, and dew was thick underfoot. I exited the front door with the intent of checking the live traps I'd set to catch the raccoons, who had been killing our chickens and ducks, taking the eggs. But my intent changed rather quickly. As I walked towards the duck and chicken pens, movement from inside one of them caught my eye. I froze up at first. Now, I'm one of the more paranoid types of people, so I was already mentally panicking. What if it was a raccoon? What if it was a weasel? My thoughts spiraled out of control as I tried to think up a plan to go grab the pellet gun and get back to the duck and chicken pens without the critter noticing me. This made me unaware of the true situation at hand. When I finally snapped back to reality, I was just about to turn and go back to the house, but a low growl made me pause once more. I turned my head to look back towards the chicken pens. My eyes widened as I saw a large silhouette sneaking along the side of the pens. I had my phone with me to use the flashlight, so I did the smartest thing ever and pointed my light right at the animal, hoping to blind it. I had originally expected to see a coyote, or possibly a bobcat, but what stood squinting in the beam of my flashlight was neither of those critters, nor any other native one. No, this creature had longish, dusty gray-brown fur covering its body, with a small patch of lighter gray painting its chest, and its overall physique reminded me of a big cat. But something was terribly off. As my eyes trailed over this thing, I noticed it had a long muzzle, paws, and amberish green eyes like a wolf. Yet it had rounded ears and a long tail like a cougar or snow leopard. In the few moments I got to look at it, I saw just how skinny it was, yet muscles still filled out its slim frame. It was clearly an apex predator in the animal world, so I was right to have been paranoid. I was still frozen then, not knowing what to do, faced with this cougar-wolf hybrid thing. Luckily, God must have been on my side. I heard the front door open, and my grandma yelled at our dog, Sunny D, to go to the bathroom. Upon hearing and eventually seeing Sunny D, this strange animal laid its ears back and fled towards the old barn, then out into the pasture, only disappearing from my sight when it reached the hayfield. I was completely shaken, to say the least, both confused and terrified at what I'd just seen and experienced. Now, Sunny D is an older dog, so she can't see or hear very well, but she came running towards me once she realized I was outside, her tail wagging like crazy. I let out the breath I didn't even know I was holding in, and I happily pet the dog, relieved that the thing left us alone and chose to run off instead of fight, as that could have been a bloody ending. I later told this story to my grandma, which got me banned from checking the live traps before school or staying outside too late. But I wasn't too disappointed. I still don't know what that creature was, but I do still see it every now and then, stalking the hayfields, up in the trees, or basking in a small patch of sun on the fence row. It also seems to know where I set up trail cams, or it just never uses the routes I put them on, as I haven't been able to catch a picture of it, unless the dark tail tip in the corner of a picture I got a few weeks ago belonged to it. Luckily, none of our animals have been harmed by this thing, so I'm not sure if it's actually a danger or not, though I can guess it's because of the way it acted towards me. I dread the day it hurts or possibly kills someone or something, as it will most likely be one of our farm animals, family members, or family friends. I just pray that the next person to encounter it is as lucky as I was. Not many people believe me about this creature, but I don't mind. It's not every day you come across something like that, something you can't find any explanation for. Thunderbird in Oklahoma farmland. From Anonymous. I'm a resident of southern Oklahoma, and I live far out in the countryside where farmland is most of all there is around. I have lived here from when I was 10, when my parents moved from the big city life of New York out to the Great Plains for a drastic change of scenery. Since the move, they've been happier and generally more agreeable in all aspects of life. Sometimes the hustle of the city isn't for everyone. For those who don't know, Oklahoma is a very hot and dry place for most of the year. It can get brutally cold in the winter, and the rains are few and far between. On the rare occasion that a storm does roll in, they're quite something to behold. The landscape being mostly flat and far-reaching lends to being able to see massive storms slithering in across the sky. Claps of thunder rumble the pebbles on the gravel road, and bolts of lightning that are like fireworks on a blank canvas. Ever since I can remember, this has been my favorite kind of weather, until one day that I will never forget. My younger brother Sam and I were taking a weekend hike in southeastern Oklahoma, where the region is most forested, around the Ouachita Mountains area if you're familiar with that location. We're both big fans of the outdoors, taking advantage of the beauty that nature has to offer. The Americas have such a vast amount of differing ecosystems within them, and we enjoy exploring them all at our leisure. At the time, I was 29. My brother was 21 years old, and while the age gap between us was large, we still managed to get along just fine. We weren't without our arguments on our previous trips, but these tend to level out as we both aged. The outdoors have always bonded our family, and we all seem to relax more once we actually get out on the trails. It's almost like taking a solo trip, but just having another body with you in case something goes wrong. This area of southeast Oklahoma is more heavily forested, full of hilly areas that eventually became the Ouachita Mountains. This region gets much more rain and is packed with lush foliage. It also has more elaborate wildlife than we're used to out in the plains. Pine and oak trees are the most populous in this area, and when they grow undisturbed, they get huge and are magnificent in all their glory. All of this being a welcomed change from the flat prairie. We felt like being in a different world while we drove out east into the woods. After a late start from our B&B, Sam and I were making our way up the rear end of one of the vistas where we had planned to camp overnight. We'd imagined a stunning view would be waiting for us at the top. However, we were beginning to lose daylight, and we could feel the winds beginning to change. The breeze was always a welcome relief, but it grew stronger and stronger as we neared the top of the hill. As the wind blew, I could begin to smell the air changing to that recognizable scent and that texture you feel before a storm is about to happen. This, paired with the clouds that became darker and more threatening, was a sure sign that we were running out of time. "Looks like rain," I said to Sam, who was walking ahead of me. "You've got to be kidding me," he turned and said with a sigh. I shrugged my shoulders at him in an effort to sympathize with his frustration. "We're almost at the top of the ridge, and we still have to set up our tent before it pours." He spoke again, resting his back against one of the oak trees. "I know," I spoke again. "The weather looked completely clear for the day. Maybe this will pass us by, but we should at least pick up our pace if we want to get a good view." Our hiking relationship has always worked quite well. Sam's always been in charge of navigation and timekeeping, and I was more the practical type. I always did my research on the region for what kinds of things were edible, what the conditions were like, and generally reading the signs that nature was giving in the moment. After my encouragement, Sam nodded, and we pressed on to climb the ridge. With every passing moment, the clouds became darker and the air became heavier. I knew we didn't have much time before we got soaked, so I started taking even bigger strides, walking with my weight held forward in an effort to quicken our pace. We would normally take a break by this point, but we wasted no time in trying to reach the top, while our backpacks grew heavier with each step we took. Finally, after what seemed like days of speed walking, we began to see more sky opening up on the horizon as we came up on the vista. The view was literally breathtaking, as we both gasped for air that the atmosphere tried to squeeze from us. The clouds above were enormous and full of water, which threatened to drop on us at any moment. We were able to see the tops of other hills and the lowest points in the valleys, just like something from a storybook. Filled with exhilaration and excitement, I neared closer to the edge, trying to look farther down the mountainside. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew me over. I fell to the ground in an effort to stay away from the edge of the cliff. As I felt powerless and scared, my brother laughed at me. My expression was one of shock while I sat on the ground. As if it were a climax to our hard trek, A thick bolt of lightning shot out from the clouds, followed by a roll of thunder that rattled in our chests. We looked at each other, knowing what had to come next. Without a word, we went to work on setting up our tent and pulling out our equipment from the backpacks. The wind was whipping through the trees now, and we could hear the birds making their last songs as the storm rolled in. With the tent taking shape and pulling out various parts from my backpack, I gave another look outward from the cliffside to the skies, which were presenting a gorgeous picture of nature's power embodied by the storm. The sun was beginning to set, and the storm dragging across the sky turned the world into a beautiful stone gray mixed with deep red and burgundy tones, like chalk on a brick wall. Out from the clouds, my eyes focused on a shape that emerged on the wind of the storm. Illuminated by the intermittent flashes of lightning, the shape of a bird became clear as it rode the waves of the sky. If you've ever seen a large bird in flight, you know how they can give the illusion of not moving while they beat their wings and stay afloat in the sky. Their mass makes them seem motionless, and while they can move a great distance, they appear to be stationary in midair. That was not the case for this bird. I watched the jet-black bird weave its way through the sky, turning and diving in and out of the huge cloud formations, disappearing from view for a moment and then coming back into my line of sight. It seemed to glide across the sky with the speed of a torpedo and the grace of an angel, beating its wings and falling through the covers of the storm. It demonstrated its prowess with ease. It managed all kinds of epic maneuvers, as if it were performing for me. My eyes darted back and forth across the stage as it danced before me, captivating its audience and holding strong against the whipping winds. Admiring this bird and its freeness in the sky, I watched with awe as it made its last rounds about the kingdom of the sky and disappeared behind a thick cloud just as a bolt of lightning came crashing down. I was speechless. I felt humbled by such a creature. I've never seen a bird move like that on any previous hike or even in the wildest nature documentaries. Its movements seemed to have had no purpose, none that I could seem to understand. I thought about what exactly it was doing, or where it was going. My thoughts instantly went to some of the best boxers or wrestlers' movements and how they move about their surroundings in an effort to recharge their energy for their performance. Having no frame of reference other than clouds, I had no idea to the true size of the bird, and with how fast it was moving, I figured it wasn't very big. "Hey, you gonna help finish or what?" Sam said, drawing me out of my trance. I'd stopped setting up, and being totally transfixed by the bird, I'd paused in mid-zipper opening of the tent's front entrance. We finished the last steps and staked the tent into the ground as the wind was blowing quite fiercely now. The thunder calmly rumbled as it neared our camp. We were sitting outside the door, watching the last flecks of light sink below the horizon. No stars could be seen as the veil of the storm covered the night sky, the occasional lightning strike giving us our view of the surroundings as darkness set in. I watched with bated breath, hoping for the return of the black bird to give me another performance. But it never circled back a second time. Not long after dark, the raindrops could be heard on the roof of our tent as Sam and I munched on granola bars. The heavy atmosphere lifting and the air getting easier to stomach with each breath, we soon relaxed while the storm gave way to our security of the night. There's something naturally human about the rain putting us to sleep. Either the white noise or the rumbling of thunder. The sleep you get camping in a rainstorm is the best sleep you can get anywhere, in my opinion. The light from our battery-powered lamps and the lightning strikes overhead allowed us to see with limited range within the tent. Quieting down, we listened to the rain while we wrapped up in our sleeping bags and began to drift off to sleep. At some point during the night, raindrops still pattering above, I felt this feeling crawl up from my stomach, that nagging sensation from my psyche that something is watching me. My eyes opened wide from a dead sleep, and I quickly took note of my surroundings. The tent lamps had powered off. Sam was sound asleep a few feet away from me. The lightning struck all around us furiously, but was met with no thunder crashes to match them. This tense feeling littered the air as she could hear the sizzle of electricity slicing through the night. The shadows of the trees surrounding us were like sleeping giants, moving and bending in the wake of the wind like they were taking deep breaths. It felt as if the majestic scenery from earlier had turned into something more sinister with the arrival of the storm. I'm not afraid of the dark. I never have been. I am afraid of getting caught unaware and being the last to know about something dangerous. In an effort to prove this to myself, I sat up in the tent and took the sleeping bag off my body. Trying to find the source of this familiar feeling, I moved closer to the opening of the tent, which was now zipped up tight. We'd positioned the tent with the opening facing the edge of the cliff, so that we'd be met with a stunning view in the morning. As I unzipped the tent's door, I was met with an equally bewildering sight. The cold night air hit my face. Raindrops cascaded down the door of the tent as I peered out into the stormy night. Fierce wind blew falling rain into my eyes, obscuring my view somewhat. Lightning scattered across the sky. The sky was black, apart from the cloudy forms that were illuminated by the lightning bolts. These fleeting moments of light revealed to me an enormous shape darting across the sky. At first, I thought it was a weather balloon or someone's tent blowing around in the sky, but as I watched on while the storm illuminated the shape, it became clear to me this was no inanimate object adrift in the sky. My heart became a pit in my stomach as I soon made out the object. The way it moved was planned, predatory, and primal. The sound of beating, massive wings echoed upon the wind. I began to make out the shape better, and I noticed it was moving closer and closer to the ridge we camped on. Then I realized its features were all too familiar. Feathers as dark as the night, even though they shimmered in the rain. Massive curled talons were tucked underneath its torpedo-like body, a head like that of a sickly crow, its hooked beak like that of a vulture. It moved with calculated efforts, harnessing the power of the storm, riding the wind like a surfer on a tidal wave. Making one final swoop into the sky, the creature released a screeching bellow, triggering a massive thunderclap and echoing through the night. I found myself in a horrible state of paralysis. This encounter shook me to the very fibers of my being. Behind me, Sam awoke with a gasp. He sat straight up in the tent. He soon scrambled over to the opening as well and caught sight of the avian giant. Not a word was shared between us as we looked out into the night. The thunderbird was even closer now, circling our tent like a falcon stalks a mouse. It began to dive down to the ridge then, while it tucked its wings close to its body. It felt as if time slowed down. Its head rose, the thunderbird's body becoming horizontal in midair, talons exposed like powerful meat hooks. Its wings stretched out like a crucifix, head aimed straight at our tent. Sam broke from his trance, grabbing the back of my shirt collar and pulling me away from the tent door, using his whole body weight to move me. I fell back to the rear of the tent as the shape of the bird began to fill the view of the door. With a sickening sound of tearing cloth, the entrance of the tent began to lift off the ground. The solid bottom of our enclosure became loose, the stakes popping out of the wet ground. The world shifted as we felt gravity sidestep us, above becoming where below should have been. We fell on top of each other in the side of the tent. We were airborne. Feeling utterly powerless, we screamed, only to be met by more furious giant wing flaps and content grunting of the thunderbird. I caught a glimpse of Sam's eyes, and I saw something I'll never forget. The unmistakable look of defeat, sadness, fear. I'm sure the same was reflected in my own expression. Suddenly, our airborne tent was met with a crash to the side. We'd smacked against something mid-flight. Sam and I were tussled about even more in the moving sack as our rough flight was made even more rough. Another horrible screech was heard from the thunderbird at a deafening volume. Then from afar, a similar screech rang out through the air. Another of the creatures. The wall of the tent was like a shadow puppet show. These shadows revealed not one, but two massive flying birds. Violent screeches and shrieks surrounded us. Suddenly, claws ripped into the tent, and with that, we could feel ourselves plummeting, our weight shifting from our stomachs to our throats, like an elevator dropping down too fast. Sam and I screamed. We could feel the tent scraping against tree branches now. With one final strike, our tent collided with the low-hanging branch of a tree, and our party came to a grinding halt. The sounds of thunder became distant. The birds above continued on through the air. We screamed again, this time in pain as the branches poked through the tent. They had ripped cloth and flesh. The two of us then fell through the tent. We collided with more branches before finally landing on the wet ground and mud. Sam lay a few feet from me, and I reached out my hand to grab his. Breathing heavy, we turned to see what had become of the two birds. They soared through the sky, and with every contact against each other, they clawed and speared one another. Their forms began to blur together as my eyes became heavy. The thunderbird's calls rattled in my head along with the raging rolls of thunder, but both became more faint as they flew farther into the night and as I drifted away. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. Bright lights burned my eyes. I felt a searing pain course through my ribs as I took each breath, a strong throbbing in my head. I looked down, seeing tubes and hoses going into me. There was a remote near my hand, so I pushed the biggest button on it. Nurses soon came to my room. After a lengthy conversation with them, they explained that Sam and I were found at the base of a tree covered in mud. Someone driving on the main road farther down the mountain found pieces of our tent strewn about the trees. They eventually came upon us. They then called the police and paramedics. We'd been carried 5 miles downhill from our original campsite by severe storm conditions. I began to spout ravings about thunderbirds, telling the nurse about the storm, the flight, and the drop. I received only looks of confusion and laughter. They told me, while I shared the same story as my brother, we both suffered injuries from the wind blowing our tent into the tree, that we were both delusional due to our shaken mental state. I'd never been so angry in all my life, treated like some child who was afraid of the dark. I'd almost died because of a real massive bird of prey that can pick 2 fully grown men out of a bolted down tent and carry them for miles in a thunderstorm. I mean, there was not just one of these creatures, but 2, maybe more out there. Thankfully, I only suffered a large gash to the head and some bruised ribs. Sam had a dislocated shoulder and sprained ankle. We were beaten, but alive. This did stop us from camping together for nearly 6 years, until after the birth of my first child. These days, we're both older, both with kids. We don't rant and rave about the night we nearly died. It just remains a bedtime story for our sons and daughters to tell on rainy nights. We take family camping trips together, but no place so remote and wild as we did in our youth. A warning to those going camping in the Americas. Mother Nature is beautiful, stunning, and breathtakingly gorgeous. She's also deadly, mysterious, and secretive. There are things we still don't know about our own planet and the creatures that live here, so it's always best to treat your surroundings with respect. I won't discourage the exploration and enjoyment of the wilderness, but I will caution you. Take every precaution and preparation you can when going into new territory, and always take a second person with you. Had it not been for Sam that night, I don't know that I would have been here to recount the story. Be wary of camping in the Ouachita Mountains of Oklahoma, especially when a storm is beginning to brew. Thank you for listening to another unsettling episode of Unexplained Encounters. You can send us your story to have it narrated on the show at darkstories.org. Unexplained Encounters is an EerieCast original series. You can find other horror-themed podcasts at EerieCast.com, such as Redwood Bureau, a fictional anthology series, Freaky Folklore, a documentary-style series about myths and cryptids around the world, Destination Terror, a show about the most haunted places, and Tales from the Break Room, another show I host all about the scary things that happen to people at work. Again, that's EerieCast.com. By the way, if you want fewer annoying ads and you want to support what we do, consider going to EerieCast.com/plus to sign up for EerieCast Plus. That unlocks all our podcasts with all but host-read ads removed. Until next time, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.
G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. And I would like to give Private Internet Access, or PIA, a shout out for sponsoring this episode. So, most people underestimate the importance of protecting your digital identity when accessing the internet. With PIA VPN, you can do more than just basic protection. PIA allows you to secure your financial transactions, browse the internet without leaving a trace, and unlock tons of blocked international streaming content on Netflix, Hulu, or Prime Video. And you can do all of this without a single server logging your activity. Founded in 2010, PIA is a leading VPN provider with over 1 million paying customers all over the world. And if you don't know, VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. Private Internet Access allows you to encrypt your connection, so anything that you do online is private and secure. Your internet service provider, the government, and even nefarious hackers will no longer have access to your data. PIA offers unlimited access to over 3,200 VPN servers in 45 countries. You can use PIA to protect your digital identity, hide your IP address, download safely, secure your bank transactions, access streaming services, and stay completely untraceable online. PIA features dedicated apps for all major platforms: Windows, Mac, Linux, Android, iOS, Amazon Fire Stick, and more. You can protect up to 10 devices at the same time, and PIA does not keep logs of your activity, ever. The service is trusted by huge companies like Forbes, Gizmodo, and Wired, and there's also a 30-day money-back guarantee. So, for a limited time, get private internet access for only $2.59 a month, plus 3 extra months for free at privateinternetaccess.com/scared. That's privateinternetaccess.com/scared to surf the internet safely. My mother was a single parent of 6, 5 girls and 1 boy, and I was the youngest. We were all opened up to the paranormal at an early age, and this took place in Hollywood, California, in the late 60s. She knew that her kids were all different. She was very supportive, in fact, and never wanted to suppress our separate abilities. She would just tell us not to go around telling people because they would think that our family was crazy. Looking back at life with my mother, I kind of tend to agree on so many levels. Something she said to me that just always stuck with me was that people don't like what they can't understand. At the time, we were renting a house on Alexandria, but the owners wanted to move back in, so we had to move. Mum worked day hours, so the only time she could go looking at rentals was at night. All 6 of us would pile into this big yellow wood panel station wagon with a suicide seat in the back, and off we would go. Most of the time, a door was unlocked, and this was the 60s. All of us armed with flashlights, but we had to be quiet. The scariest times for me was when the doors were open, so me being the smallest, my brother would help me into a window so I could run to the door and open it for them. Now that I'm writing this, I believe that was probably breaking and entering, right? Anyway, if there was a house that made any one of us uncomfortable, she would scratch it off her list and she would move on. It was hard to find a house that fit all of us, especially anything my mother could afford. But one day I came home from school and was surprised to see all of our stuff being moved to the house directly across the street, where an old evil lady with her windows blacked out lived in the back. I finally found my mother and I asked her what was going on. She told me that she got a really good deal that she just couldn't pass up. She said, just stay away from that old lady. It was an old 2-story house with wood floors, 1 bathroom and 3 bedrooms. It used to be 4, but the 4th bedroom, a small portion in the back, was divided to accommodate another renter, that old lady. I must add too that I was young and very small for my age. There was so much room and so much commotion downstairs that my mother was understandably distracted at the time. I asked her why she didn't let me check the house for anything bad first, and she said, look, there just wasn't time. It was a good deal and I had to take it. Why don't you go and check it now? Feeling very important, I went off to investigate. I went into the kitchen, big. I went into the dining room, fancy. And then I started up the stairs. Mum mentioned that there was a bedroom big enough for all of my sisters, a place for all my toys in the hall, and a room for my brother, so I was excited to see this. The staircase was enclosed with a door at the bottom. We went up the steps to a landing where it turned and then proceeded up from there. So I got to the top step when they got me. It just felt like 3 cold hands, quickly, one after the other, grabbed around my throat with so much force. I tried to scream, but the grip was just getting tighter and I thought my vocal cords were being crushed. They started forcing me backward and I felt like I was about to fall, but they just held me there for what seemed like forever in my mind, my toes teetering on the edge of the top step. I couldn't move and it felt like surges of electricity were just running through my body. And then they started guiding me backwards down the steps, fearing at any moment that I was going to be thrown. I saw little spurts of my own breath coming from my nose as they were guiding me down, and I could feel only the edge of the steps graze the tips of my toes while I was trying to grip one of them onto each step. They eventually got me to the landing and up at the wall. It felt like 1,000 weights were pressing against my chest while I was still hardly touching the floor. I was starting to pass out when I heard a voice in my head say to me, "You're strong, you have faith." I saw a white glowing light around me and I said something, and then they lessened their grip ever so slightly, but it was enough for me to drop to the floor and run down to my mother. And as soon as I got there, I told her what happened. I said, "Please, Mum, please, can we not live here?" But she said that it was too late. We had nowhere else to go. It wasn't long before everyone else in the family had their own experiences too. We all hated that house, but we had to endure it until we could afford to move again. Now, my brother liked to tinker, and he liked to take things apart and see how they worked, if you will. He took the time to sometimes share that part of his life with me, and I'd like to think that that's where I got my inventor's mind and my ability to fix almost anything. He set up a workshop under the stairs in the basement. I sometimes found some of my electric toys being dissected in there, then put back together on that workbench. One day, I was looking for one of my toys and suspected that I knew right where to look, but I was too scared to go down into the basement alone, so I took my trusted cat Frischka. I thought that he'll protect me. So I started down the stairs with my cat in my arms, and I got almost to the bottom step when the lights went out and the door to the house slammed shut. Scared half to death, I felt for the railing and started to run back up when I saw something. Normally, you could see the moonlight from under the house through the vents to the outside, that is. And something moving was blocking the light out and quickly coming towards me. It almost looked like billowing black smoke from the back of the house. Just then, my loving cat Frischka hissed and clawed me to get away. He jumped from my arms and escaped through one of the grates on the other side. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could with my heart pounding out of my chest. I grabbed the door handle, jiggling it back and forth, thinking that it was stuck. And then I heard a loud, long exhale behind me, followed by the smell of what I can only describe to this day as rotten eggs. The door finally opened, and I just walked out and I slammed and locked it straight behind me. When I told my brother about this, he said that he never felt good down there too, and he always kept the door locked after that. Now, my family was very involved in the church. We cleaned it every Saturday and helped with all the events and variety shows and whatnot. A funny thing, though, was that our family was so big that it felt like we were the variety show in the end. One such day, though, they were all at church just doing something. I don't remember what. I had just arrived home from school, and someone, I think one of my sisters, was supposed to be there to greet me. As you walk through the dining room on the left, you walked into the hall and you turn right, and on the left is the boarded-up wall to the tenant's dwelling behind us, with that evil old lady, and just thinking about it gives me chills. And straight ahead was the bathroom. If you turn left into the hall, you see my mum's room that she and I shared together. Next to that, the door to the upstairs, and in the middle, the door to the underhouse. And well, nobody was there, and I wasn't going to stay in that house alone, so I walked into the hall and I sat on the phone bench. For those of you who don't know what that is, it looks like a wooden end table with a padded seat on it, so you can talk on a corded phone. Anyway, earlier, I saw my friend's dad's car parked across the street, so I knew my friend was home, so I figured that I would call him and just hang out there. I could just wait for someone to come home. But as I'm sitting there, I hear crackling coming from upstairs. It must have been one of my siblings, I thought, so I went to the bottom of the stairs and leaned in on one foot. I said, "Who's up there?" And instantly, the crackling stopped. Thinking they didn't hear me, I yelled again, this time calling out a few of my sister's names, but still nothing. So I sat back down on the bench and I waited for them to come down. It was really quiet though, and there wasn't really a sound after that. But just then, as I was sitting there, to the right of me, it sounded like someone was pressing their body against the other side of the boarded up wall, listening. Then a muffled, quiet, evil giggle. It felt off, just really off. The crackling noise started back up again now, coming from the top of the stairs, followed by just an ear-piercing ringing inside my head. Feeling uncomfortable, I picked up the phone, not taking my eyes off of that staircase. I dialed my friend's number, and before I could even say hello, I could see it as it turned the corner of the staircase. It was huge. It didn't have a human form, but there were what looked like hundreds of eyes just all over it, and it was pulsating a red amber. The deafening sound of crackling was coming from it, with sparks flashing just all over its form. It was slowly gliding down the stairs, coming towards me, and I then heard more prominent laughter, almost like a cackle coming from behind that wall, and at this, I just ran. I dropped the phone and I ran straight over to my friend's house until someone came home later. Now, please keep in mind too that we only lasted 6 months in this house, so these are all the events that I know of within that time frame, and was confirmed to me by my siblings firsthand. A brief description of where this next event took place though, because it was the second floor. Standing at the top of the stairs to the left, the back of the house was my brother's room. Inside the door to the right was a short wall and the foot of his bed. Alongside of his bed was a window. All of our beds in our houses always face east. Then a desk next to his bed, and then an open space at the back corner near the closet. On the right side of the stairs was all of my sister's room. It was long and really big, and it was set up as follows. So the closet was to the far right, then lined from the right to the left, 4 single mattresses on the floor, next to each other too, with all heads to the east, then a window. Now, my family were all avid readers, and that's pretty much all you could do back then anyway. But late one night, about 2 a.m., my sisters were all laying on their beds reading when my brother burst open the door, white as a ghost, grabbing his neck, grasping for air, frantically telling them to all go downstairs. He briefly shared his experience and then just ran out of the room. At that point, he ran downstairs to wake up our mother. I witnessed this too because I shared a room with her. Actually, one of the beds upstairs was supposed to be mine, but I always complained about seeing a man hanging from a rope over the staircase landing. Plus, I had too many experiences up there myself, so I didn't like being up there. But the door swung open, slamming against the wall. He was standing there in a white t-shirt and PJ pants. There was no colour in his face, and his neck looked like it was on fire. He said that he was just falling asleep when he felt this really negative presence. Something caught his eye in the back corner of the room, and it was the full-body apparition of an old man, and there was just hate emanating from him. He started to sit up, but the man flew at him from across the room. He tried to describe it as it was quick, like 1 second he was there, and the next he was on top of him, so fast in fact that the curtains and everything else in the room were affected like a big burst of wind. He grabbed his neck with both hands, gripping tight, and was choking the life out of him. He said that he was nose to nose with this thing, and to this day, can't shake the evil image of his face. My sister and I both remember him saying at the time that the man in a guttural voice said to him, "I want your body." My mother put a cold rag on his neck and sat there and tried to calm him down. We all remember dark bruises in the shape of 2 hands stayed on his neck for quite some time, and chest too, for at least over a week, and he never slept upstairs again after that. Through the years, he never really wanted to talk about this until I told him that I was writing our story down. Now, on that night, all of my sisters brought down their bedding except one. She was headstrong and stubborn, still is. She was the cut the crap, it's all in your head type of person. That is, until it happened to her. My older sister tried warning her that on numerous occasions she saw something dark lurking in the closet, and that one night she woke up to something pressing on her while she was sleeping. But that just still didn't deter her. We were all just dramatic and crazy. In the end, she was happy because she got that big room all to herself. But one day, she was upstairs taking a nap, and she never slept without a fan on. The fan was located all the way across the room in front of that closet. The fan was round in the shape of a fat cat. It was about 17 inches tall and 14 inches wide, with slats going around it, about 2 inches apart, with big metal blades. My sister always slept with her arm extended out from under her pillow, and she said that she was sound asleep when, all of a sudden, she woke up to her finger being sliced by the blades of the fan, and just extreme pain. She pulled her hand out of the fan and ran downstairs to our mother. I remember that there was a lot of blood. My mother then wrapped her hand with a gauze and papaya, so as to eliminate scarring, and we all went up to investigate. And the fan was still there, but it was unplugged. We just couldn't understand how it even got over to her. We had shag carpet, the 60s, so it couldn't have vibrated all the way over there. Plus, it would have had to have travelled over some articles of clothing that would have stopped at about 5 feet away from the bed. And you know, after having that happen to you, and the fact that your entire family is now sleeping together downstairs, and the fact that she saw the fan was unplugged, wouldn't that make you want to join everyone downstairs in the living room? Nope, not her. And she stayed sleeping up there for about a month, until she was forced to believe us. By this time, she had made the room her own, and she took 2 of the mattresses and put them on top of each other, and put them both long ways under the window. And one day she told me that she was in the beginning stages of a dream state when she was fully awakened by pressure on her chest. She said that it felt dark and evil, and she just couldn't move. All of these things were racing through her head when she remembered what our minister told her when we were in council about this house. He told her to try and communicate with it, ask it if it would follow her spirit guide into the light, and at this, the pressure started to get worse. And the more love she tried to send to this thing, the heavier it got. She said that it felt like a cement slab was just crushing her body and expelling all of her air. I asked her how she got out from under it, and she told me that she prayed and said some things our minister told us to say, and finally it lifted. For the rest of the time that we were there, she slept in the living room with us after that. And in the end, we actually found out that a man did hang himself on the stairway there, and also that someone shot themselves in the closet upstairs. As for the old lady in the back, she was a very bad alcoholic who practiced the dark arts and some voodoo or something. She blackened out all of her windows to keep their energy happy. She apparently told the neighbor this. No one really paid her any mind, though. They all thought that she was just crazy and she was an old lady who had just gone around the bend. But I often wonder just who she was before this and what made her that way. What was so bad in her life that made her want to torment others and, even worse, innocent children? And was the evil man in my brother's room connected to her in some way? I guess that I'll just probably never know. Our minister told us in the end, too, that the house could never be truly cleansed until she was gone from it. So, in the end, we all just decided that moving was our last option. Two weeks ago, while I was reading on the couch in my living room, I heard a knock on my door of my flat. I wasn't expecting anyone that day, and it's rather unlikely that it was one of my next-door neighbours, since on my floor, we're all students who come and leave after a year or two, and don't really need to meet each other anyway. Mind you, there isn't any peephole on the front door, so I couldn't see who it was either. A few seconds after the knock, though, the voice of a middle-aged man says through the door, "I'm here for the water meter." Now, that was weird. I sent the previous week the water meter reading to the estate agency, so it's still sitting. I shout back to him that I already sent it. And there's a few seconds pause before he adds, "I need to see it." I say, "Why do you need to see it?" He pauses again before asking if I can open the door. I get up, start walking to the front door, next to which is the bathroom and the water meter. I tell him that I'm going to read the numbers to him through the door and do so. There's that awkward pause again, and he says, "Thanks," and I expect to hear his footsteps in the corridor while he leaves. I live in an attic room in an 18th century building with old creaky wooden floors and stairs, and thin walls as well, so you can hear people walk or talk on the phone or basically anything, but it just remains silent. At this point, I know that he's just standing right behind my door, and I have an ominous feeling when, after like 30 seconds, I don't hear any steps, and put the bathroom's door wedge under the front door without moving away from the entry. After a minute, I take my phone and I start dialing my mum, and this is the moment where I can hear him leave. I get my mum on the phone and proceed to tell her what just happened. She's even more on guard than her daughter, and decides to send an email to the estate agency from which we rent the flat from, so we can know if it was just a misunderstanding, like the water meter guys were just not warned that the agency got my water meter reading, or was simply late, or something like that. And we got their answer a few days later, because they never sent anyone. They went through several options though. It could have been the landlord who came himself, unlikely but possible, or the syndicate of tenants. They then detailed in their email that they called the owner, who was several hundred kilometers away at the time and never sent anyone, which is all to say that the man was never sent by anyone. He managed to get into a building protected by 2 entry codes and directly went to the last door to ask to be left inside a flat rented by a lone female student during one of the few moments of her schedules she's there during the period of the year where tenants give their water meter reading, and didn't ask any other tenants despite the fact that he should have had the list of who communicated it and who did it. I still don't know how he did it and who he was despite our best efforts. I have that ominous feeling sometimes thinking that I could have naively just let him inside. I probably would have, in fact, if my mother didn't remind me to send my reading, and if I didn't smell that fishy smell, or the fact that he knew exactly what to do and when, and who his target was. I'm moving out soon to another city for my studies, and you can't know just how relieved I actually am. When I was 18, I worked at a local Target. This is when we used to have a wall next to the registers of Pokemon, baseball, collectible cards, etc., and a Starbucks in front of the register by the front doors. For context too, I'm a female. Well, one day, I was filling in this wall with some more cards, and an awkward tall man came up and started looking at the Pokemon section next to me. He asked, "Do you like Pokemon?" And I said yes, which then led to us talking about Pokemon. I didn't think much of it. He picked some, checked out, and then he left. 3 days later, he returned to the store, finds me, and buys me candy and tells me to have a nice day. So, things start escalating at this point. He would come in frequently, just looking for me, started sitting at the Starbucks tables and watching me while I work, which then eventually he started buying me more candy, Starbucks drinks, flowers, and then little girl panties, pacifiers, little girl hair accessories, which, of course, I'm freaked out now. I tried telling my bosses, but they couldn't really do anything about it. Called the cops, and they couldn't do anything either. He actually followed me to the back room one day since I started leaving the registers whenever he came into the store. And that was when we were able to call the cops because he cornered me in the back room. But thankfully, our stockroom guys were back there to basically save me. We were able to get a restraining order on him for the store so he couldn't enter anymore, but that's when he started waiting outside for me, following me to my car and leaving love notes on my vehicle for me to come out to. Honestly, it was terrifying, and my mum knew too, but again, we just couldn't do much. One day, though, he actually followed me from my work to my mother's house where I lived at the time. I'd never seen his car until this day, and stood outside the house, singing love songs and reading poems to me, really loudly too, and my mother called the cops. We kept telling him to leave, and when the cops got there, they finally were able to get him to go away, but Now he left me notes in my house, sent me letters and packages with porn, sexy outfits, girly panties, baby stuff, etc. During all of this too, my mum and I were trying to get a restraining order on him ourselves and charge him for harassment. But it's not like it stopped him. Finally though, one night, I was coming home from work and he waited around the corner of the house and he actually attacked me. He grabbed me around my face and dragged me to the ground. I screamed so loud and so much that, luckily, I had neighbors come outside and help me. He was arrested at that point, and I had enough evidence saved up to be able to take him to court, and now he's been in jail for 8 years. But he's due to be released in 2021. He's actually in the Jester 4 unit. He was stalking another local girl that I connected with so we could help each other out after he got sent away, that is. She was just starting to get his attention, so luckily she never got hurt, like I did. So, this is still an active situation that we're trying to figure out how to deal with. It's going to be a bit of a long one, but the details are needed to give you an idea of just how crazy this whole thing is. So, I'm 29, female, switched up my career in healthcare to follow my dream of learning how to work on cars. I was hired this past May at a dealership as a quick service mechanic, and fell in love immediately with everything about it, and my co-workers. I had noticed how cute my trainer was, and not only was he cute, but he was very patient with training me too. I was so new to working on cars that I needed to learn the basics, and he was really helpful and nice about everything. His name was Nick, and he was 40 and male. Me and Nick had actually hit it off in every way as well. He asked me on the first date to go geocaching, which was great, because I love that stuff, and Nick and I have been side by side since then. I always really loved everyone I worked with, always laughing and playing pranks on each other, but also always helping each other and busting our asses to make the customers happy. I should add too that my best friend works there as well, and another good friend of ours had gotten hired too. We were a close-knit family in the quick service department. And well, I didn't make it past my probationary period because I was just a bit slower. So Nick has a full mechanic garage at his dad's place, and I'd meet him after he got off work so we could make some side job money. About a month and a half ago, Nick and I decided to get an apartment together, and it's been amazing. I've been bringing him to work, grabbing him on lunch breaks, and picking him up, which I love because I can also say hey to all of my old co-workers. That being said, I should add that Nick doesn't have any social media, and we are together literally all the time, except for when he's working, obviously. But here's where things get crazy. So, I got a message request on Facebook from some random girl saying, "I can't believe what I'm seeing. Nick is my man, and he's in your profile photo with you, and he's been my man for 7 months. I immediately went into panic mode, called him at work asking who this girl is, and he was honestly just as confused. The more I talked to this girl, though, to try and figure out what the hell is going on, the more she said weirdly specific things about Nick, like the truck that he drives. They meet up at his dad's shop, which no one would know about his dad's shop because he never talks about it. She knew his phone number and pretty much everything. But she could never provide proof, screenshot conversations, photos of the two of them, nothing. We got to the point, though, where it felt like this thing was real and that her and I were going to team up. But she just never answered my calls, only messages. But after Nick and I had a huge talk about it, I knew that something wasn't right about this girl, and I just had to get to the bottom of it. But I started getting pretty scared one day when I dropped Nick off after lunch. A minute went by and I got a message saying, "Damn, Nick looks sexy in that hoodie today." And this really shook me up. I asked what color, and she said the correct color, and at this point, my first thought is stalker is like actually watching us. I told Nick about how she knew what he was wearing, and he was super creeped out. Then, when I pick him up, I'll usually park by the quiet side of the building where no one can really see me. This time, though, a work truck drives by me really slowly. I pretend not to notice him because I was in no mood to chat with anyone, and I recognized the driver as a former co-worker of mine that I'd only spoken to maybe 2 times during my time at the dealership. However, we were friends on Facebook, and within a minute of him passing me by, the girlfriend messages me saying, "You're waiting for Nick on the side of the building right now." And in that moment, I started to freak out. This dude is pretending to be my boyfriend's girlfriend. Then, after talking to Nick about it, we find out that, yeah, he's the only one from work that knows that Nick's dad had a shop. Nick had worked on this guy's truck before. They aren't friends, but they chat here and there, and, well, not anymore, but I just don't know why. He was saying such gross things to me as he was pretending to be my boyfriend's girlfriend. And if he's capable of doing this, who knows what else he's capable of? He's also a giant dude in his 40s with children of his own. I have no actual proof, of course, other than the fact that any Tinder this girl was active on, so was he. I see this dude every day too, and Nick still works with him. He's in a different department than Nick, thank God, but still. So yeah, I'm still not sure what to do about any of this. This happened when I was about 23, female, and living on a quiet street of a busy road. It was a good neighborhood, and I never really felt unsafe. Well, except this night. So, I was walking home at about 11:30, and there were still people about when I passed the Tesco Express, round the corner from my flat. As I walked past, a man came out, and I noticed him stop, but didn't think much of it. I continued up and around the corner onto my road, which seemed deserted. I had my headphones in, silly I know, but I noticed someone behind me. I glanced back and noticed a man with Tesco bags, but he didn't worry me yet. Now, before I continue though, I have to explain the layout of my flat. We, my parents and I, had the 2 bottom floors, ground and lower ground. Our bedrooms were on the ground floor by the front door, and the kitchen and the bathroom, living room and the dining room were on the lower ground floor. The front door was also on the side of the building, so you're perpendicular to the street when going inside. So I get to my front door and something catches the corner of my eye. I look to my right, to the street, and Tesco man is just standing there, staring at me. He was standing in front of a street lamp, so his face was dark. I quickly got myself inside, though, and I dropped my bag in my bedroom and heard soft knocks coming from the front door. I could see the front door from my room, so I crouched low and quietly locked the front door from the inside, hoping that he didn't hear or see me. But he just kept knocking softly. I slipped downstairs when my parents were watching TV. I was freaked out, but embarrassed, so didn't mention it. I figured that he would give up soon and just go away. I sat in the living room with my parents, but being closest to the door, I could still just hear him knocking, and my parents didn't hear it right away. Eventually, I went to get some water from the kitchen. When I came back out, my mum was at the foot of the stairs. She said, "Hey, I think somebody's knocking on our door." The jig was up. "Hey, Mum, I was too embarrassed to tell you, but some guy followed me home, and I think that's him at the door." "What? Why didn't you say anything?" We went upstairs and kind of stood by the front door. My dad came up and asked if everything was okay, and I quickly called him up. My mum called first. "Hello?" On the other side of the door came, "You alright?" I think he thought that was me speaking through the door, so my dad, in his sternest voice, said, "Can I help you?" "Nah, you're alright," came back. "Listen, you need to leave before I call the police." I don't remember exactly what Tesco man said then, and it was some vague threat, but it was also obvious that he was leaving. After a few moments, we went outside to make sure that he was gone, and there was no sign of him. But because he knew where I lived, I was worried for quite some time that he would come back. Thankfully, we moved a year later, although I always loved that flat, so it was a shame. This happened 3 years ago, right when we were having our house restored. So there was scaffolding just everywhere outside the house, which has 2 stories. There was a wood panel in front of my window, which overlooks the street, so it wouldn't be damaged by the coating. But all the other panels had been taken off, so my window was the last one that was still protected. It was the weekend, and that night, my parents were having dinner at some friend's house who lived outside of town, and I was alone with my sister and her boyfriend, who slept in the bedroom right above mine. We were all exhausted and went to bed at around 10 p.m. As usual, as typical 19-year-olds do, I still wanted to watch an episode of a TV show, but there was a festival a few blocks away with loud music, so I decided to put on my headphones. I was about 20 minutes into the episode when I heard some metallic noises outside, like the scaffoldings were shaking. I took off my headphones and listened for a moment. The noises were still there, but it was very discreet. Now, I have severe anxiety and I'm pretty used to things feeling a bit off, so I try to rationalize everything, otherwise it's just too overwhelming for me and I go into full panic mode. So I told myself, okay, must be the wind, nothing to worry about. I put my headphones back and I resumed my episode. Barely a minute later though, my sister barged into my room. No need to tell you that I jumped like someone had yelled into my ears. I was super annoyed at first, but she seemed stressed, so I took my headphones off, and then she whispered that there were 3 guys right outside your window. Didn't you hear them? I thought it was some kind of a sick joke, but she was deadly serious. I got out of bed and then saw her boyfriend come down too. We stared at each other in silence for a few seconds, and I heard voices. Quiet, hushed voices. I was literally frozen with fear. And yes, bravery is really not my strong suit. And I started shaking. My sister immediately took my phone and called the cops because I was too panicked to say anything. And she didn't want her boyfriend to call because she was scared the cops wouldn't come if it was a man who called. She made sure to speak super loud so the men outside would hear and explained that there were 3 guys who were trying to break into our house via the scaffoldings and that we were 2 women alone. And guess what the cop said? Yeah, well, can't you just open another window and tell them to go away? Sure. My sister told them that it was out of the question, asked them to come, and the cops made it damn clear that they wouldn't because of the festival, even though our house was just a few blocks away from it. Welcome to France. My sister eventually hung up since there was nothing to do to convince them. But then we were kind of desperate, so we resorted to our last option, our dog. She was used to the noises of construction work, so she stayed quiet the whole time. We brought her upstairs in my room, and she must have felt our anxiety because when she heard the voices, this time, she started barking like crazy. She's actually a small hunting dog who doesn't like strangers and has a very big voice for her size. And almost as soon as she barked, we heard really loud noises this time, meaning that they were getting back down to the street. We waited a few minutes and then went to the room next to mine and carefully opened the window to see if they were actually gone. They were about 10 meters away, just looking at the house, and when they saw us looking, they started walking away like nothing had happened. They turned left and then came back, went right and came back again, and finally walked towards the other end of the street, watching other houses. We didn't sleep until my parents came back 3 hours later, just in case. And while we were waiting for them, my sister told me that when she first heard the noises, she turned around in her bed and saw them at her window. Apparently, they checked the house from the outside, saw my sister and her boyfriend, and still decided to break in. Turns out, too, that the construction workers forgot to take off the ladder that granted access to the scaffoldings. So, if your house or building is being restored, my advice is keep an eye on those ladders, and always make sure that they're taken off each night. Around May of 2013, me and 3 friends from university were taking a gap year and decided to go travelling around North America. We're from the northwest of England. Up until this incident, we were in the US for maybe 4 months, but we left within a few days of this happening and just returned home. So our trip was what you would expect of 3 20-year-old students. Lots of partying, drinking and drugs. We were relatively sensible though amidst all of this, and never really done anything people would consider crazy or irresponsible. But we were renting a small flat and had about 5 or 6 usual spots that we would go to where we would meet people, mostly women, and we would get drunk and hopefully try and get lucky. But one particular day, we'd been to the local supermarket to get some food and things for the flat. We took a cab and the driver seemed really friendly and we just got talking. And he told us about a pretty good place to go and drink and filled our heads with the usual full of hot women, cheap drinks, etc., etc. The driver even told us that he'd be going himself tonight and we should consider coming too, and we could have a drink together. He was really interested in the English Premier League and wanted to pretty much talk about it because nobody there was into it at the time. So we arranged to meet him there around 9:30. He wrote the address on any piece of paper and said that any taxi driver will know where to take us. So we get ready, like any usual night. We hail a taxi, and when we hand him the note, the first red flag, he looks back at the three of us and asks us if we know what this place is. We tell him about the other cab driver, and he basically warns us that it's an invite-only sort of place, and apparently things get a little weird in there. We decide to go anyway, but he also warns us that this is going to be a pretty expensive fare, as it's maybe a 35-minute drive. I remember having second thoughts at this moment, but my friends just wouldn't be swayed, so off we went. We arrive a short time later, and the place can only be described as just a derelict-looking building, just on the edges of what seemed like an industrial estate. Pretty creepy looking back at it. We got out of the taxi, pay the fare, and head toward the building. There was a main door, but it was a huge double-fronted steel door, so we knocked, only for there to be no answer. We walked around the building and found a few guys having a smoke outside. We told them that we'd been invited by a cab driver and described him. They knew who we were talking about and told us to just wait outside while they fetched him. But note also that these people were not welcoming or polite. They actually were pretty strange and seemed like they were trying to intimidate us. The taxi guy comes out and he isn't happy as earlier in the day, but seems friendly enough, and we go inside with him. This place was pretty dimly lit, with the sound of music coming from below. It sort of sounded like it was underwater almost. He told us to wait while we went into a room, and he came out with a stamp and stamped our hands. I remember the stamp was an orange circle with an X in the middle. I didn't think much of it. Just a small detail that I remember, though. He tells us to follow him, and as he promised, there was a pretty large area full of people dancing and seemingly having a good time. But something about it just seemed really off. It was as if it was either scripted or all of these people were just really tripping. It turned out to be the latter as well. But we started drinking and making small talk with people who were either too messed up to converse or just didn't seem interested in talking with us, so we made our own fun, started drinking a lot, and tried to source some drugs. We found the taxi guy, and he told us to give him some money and he'd bring us back some good stuff. So we did. He stuck to his word too, and about 30 minutes later, we were pretty messed up, but were still enjoying ourselves. But right here is where the night takes a turn. A guy approaches us in a long jacket and asks us some questions. Where are you guys from? Are we armed? And some others that I can't remember. Pretty weird, but we just brushed it off. A few more guys who were his friends started talking with us, and after a while we agreed that we would go back to their place for a sort of after-party thing. And this was literally the worst mistake of my life. We get in the truck with these guys, and there was a few more following us. Seemed pretty normal at this point, until we realized that nobody else in the truck was talking except for us, and there was also no music. It was kind of awkward and a little bit concerning, and I started to panic a little at this point, and I suggested that maybe we should just get out because we didn't know where we were and we should be getting back. My two friends didn't argue too, but the guy driving the truck just completely ignored us. Eventually, though, we get back to this sort of studio apartment with 2 floors. It was very open plan except for a few chairs and some weird random art pictures propped up on wooden mounts. Again, no music, kind of weird, and at this point, I basically said to my friends something like, let's just slip out for a ciggy and we'll all just leave. But they wouldn't let us leave, basically telling us to have a good time and chill out till the others arrive. We were obviously pretty worried, and even though we hadn't been threatened or anything, something just seemed really off. Until one of the guys, who had not said a word the whole drive, came and sat near us and plainly asks my friend, while taking a hold of his wrist, "How much would I have to pay to watch you slit your wrist?" We really didn't know what to say, and I tried to awkwardly just laugh it off. At this point, the drug and alcohol effects were wearing off, and I realized what a bad situation this is. So I stand up and say that we really need to leave because we're busy the next day, only to be told that we have to stay for a while. It wasn't an order as such, but it may as well have been. We flat out don't drink anything at this point, and we can't even talk amongst ourselves because the guy who asked about my friend's wrist is basically sitting right in between us. The taxi guy is nowhere to be seen, and another group of people arrived, and they were dressed really strange, to us at least. Long coats, huge boots, fingerless gloves, usually something that we honestly would have laughed about, but in this situation, it just wasn't funny at all. After the new group conversed with the old group, they literally all walk to the part of the room where we're sitting in and ask us if we have any family in the country with us because they know that we're visiting. I think pretty quickly and say, yes, I gave my brother and his friends the address of the place that we went to initially and they'll be worrying. He flat out calls me a liar and we're all pretty terrified now. One of my friends was asking what they were doing with us and why they wouldn't let us leave. And after maybe another 2 hours of sitting on this couch and the other groups of the people standing in little groups and turning and shooting us looks every now and again, I get up and ask what time it is and I need to be going. I basically get told to sit back down and I don't need to be worrying about the time. Enter taxi guy. He comes into the room and straight away we make eye contact. He mouthed something to me but I couldn't make it out, but I knew that whatever it wasn't good. I stand up and walk toward him. He meets me halfway and tells me that he isn't allowed to be talking to me and that he's sorry. At this point, I'm actually considering that we may die in this place in some sort of crazy horror movie style cult killing. I return to my friends and tell them that I think they'll do something really bad if we don't find a way to leave. I remember the studio wasn't very high up in the building, maybe 1 or 2 flights of stairs, and that the main door wasn't open when we arrived. One of my friends stood up and basically said something along the lines of, "Look, whatever you're going to do, either do it now or just let us leave." And literally, everybody except us and the taxi guy started laughing hysterically. Fear started turning pretty quickly to anger, and I basically said to my friends, "Screw this, let's just walk past them." As we approached the door, one guy pretty much stands and blocks the door. In my head, I thought if I shove him, open the door and run, maybe we'll get out. But basically, before I got the chance, the whole group started beating us up, spitting, kicking, pretty much everything, and I remember the taxi guy just trying to drag guys off of us, but that was it. After they beat us up, I remember being dragged back down the same stairs as we'd brought in, and I also remember seeing my friends being dragged behind me as I was facing the opposite way. It was light outside now, and I see the main door. We were urinated on when we got outside and had petrol poured on us as well. I honestly, too, thought that I was about to be burned alive, and I was just sobbing. My friends the same. The whole ordeal ended a few minutes later, and the guys got into the same 2 trucks, and they left, and we were bloody and covered in piss and petrol and terrified in the middle of practically nowhere. We basically ran the first chance that we got when the guys drove away in the truck. It took us about 2 hours of walking until we came across a petrol station. The man working there was horrified and called the police, who arrived relatively quickly. He asked us if we could remember where this happened, and we no longer had the piece of paper with the address to the place on it, and none of us could remember the name. We were still pretty shook, but we managed to direct them back to the building where we were locked in, still covered in piss and petrol, mind you. None of the injuries we got from being beat up were too bad, just some bruises and a couple of cuts. We told the story maybe 5 or 6 times all in, and were later informed of some other tourists who reported something very similar. The building that we were in was used for art shows or something, and the locks to the studio that we were in had been smashed off. This whole ordeal basically sparked agoraphobia within me, and after returning to the UK a few days later, It probably ruined the best part of my 20s and still to this day traumatizes me. But having a son and a family and such has helped me greatly. Whether it was a gang of lunatics just trying to terrify us, or whether they had other plans for us, but something happened, I don't know. But it was definitely the most terrifying time of my life. One of my two friends also had to seek counseling for this, and the other basically just won't talk about it. Just to add as well, we all did have phones, but when we were brought into the apartment, we were asked nicely to leave our phones in the truck, as no one used phones because it would ruin the night, because people would be antisocial. We were gullible and we agreed, and that was really stupid. So let me preface this by saying that it is possible it could have been my imagination, considering how young I was at the time, but I want to know what you guys think, and if something similar has happened to anyone else here. So I used to live on a military base in Hawaii. Father was in the Navy, and there wasn't much to do there. I don't know exactly my age at the time, but maybe around kindergarten? Hawaii didn't require kindergarten at the time, so I wasn't in school yet. I know that at least. But outside of our house there was a covered car park that people in the community used because the houses didn't have garages, and there were various storm drains that were around the car park. I would always play there since it was right outside of our house. Not the brightest move, but kids are dumb, right? But one day I was playing there and I thought it would be fun to just drop things down the storm drain to see how far it went. I had dropped a couple of rocks and some small sticks and eventually ran out of things to throw in, so I started saying hello to hear my echo. I honestly didn't expect to hear anything other than my own voice, and I was surprised when I got a response. And a little girl called back to me. I wasn't scared, but just confused. I asked her what she was doing down there, and she said that her and her family lived down there. I remember I kept trying to look closer in, but it was just so dark that you couldn't see the bottom at all. The storm drain went right down and was covered by a grate, not like the drain Pennywise used, for instance. But we sat for a while and we talked. I don't really remember the whole conversation that we had, but it went on for quite some time. I vividly remember, though, the last part of it because I felt so guilty and just hurt. Years later, in fact, I still do, even though I'm not sure if this even happened. So she wanted to play with me, and I said that I could invite her in for dinner, and she got really excited by that idea. So I ran inside and I asked my mum if my friend could come over for dinner. But she unfortunately said no and wouldn't let me go back out to tell her. But the next day I rushed out to explain to my friend what had happened, but she just wasn't there. And after that, I just never heard from the little girl in the drain again. I remember crying that day, and I blame my mum for me losing my only friend that I had made there. My mum still remembers this happening too, and just how upset I was, but again, what do you guys think? So first of all, I want you guys to know that everything I'm about to share is real. I've talked to several people about the happenings in my room, and in the past few months I've looked for help, searched for clues and explanations, and tried to make it somehow stop, but it just hasn't. Now, a few things to know. I'm 20 years old and I'm living on a shared flat with 4 other people. I've lived here for 3 years now, and the other people are all around the same age since it's an apartment for students. And the first creepy thing started right away when I moved in. So for the first time in my life, I actually started to experience sleep paralysis. Before this, I didn't even know it existed, just after the first time I got them. Sometimes I would get them every night, and sometimes they would stop for like weeks or months at a time. But in my paralysis state, I feel like there's another presence in my room, and I see a dark silhouette walk around my room, standing next to me, standing in front of the door, sitting on the chair, etc. But as much as I know this is pretty common in these kinds of paralysis situations, the really creepy thing started happening like 2 months ago, and until then I just lived with it. To be honest, I don't really know when or exactly what started it, but I remember my Wii console just randomly booting up one night, just in the nights as well, and it sounded as if somebody was trying to put a CD in, like just the sound of the console itself, or as if somebody pressed the button on the console to output the CD inside, but there was nothing in it. It was like this mechanical rotating sound, and I hope you understand what I mean at this point. I would always turn her off again, but it was not unusual to have this happen a few times in one night. I even moved my television with the console to another socket, but it just didn't change anything. So, one day I just got sick of it, and I unplugged it and left it as it is. But the next thing I know is that after 10 PM, I heard scratches at the walls every night. At first, I thought that it was just rats or something like this, but the walls are made out of concrete here and are gapless on the insides. I know that since I once drilled a hole in it because I wanted to hang up a mirror. The walls of the whole building were made up of cement bricks placed on one another. I also heard something like sneezes, hard to explain, but in a very high-pitched voice, like a child. Sneezes or maybe hissings or something. I can't really explain it because it's hard to, but when I talked with my flatmates about this, they said that they never heard scratches on the walls, but one of them told me that he had once heard loud, heavy footsteps at around 3:30 in the morning. They were fast, and it sounded like someone walked around in a panic, but he didn't dare get out of his room to check out who was there, since it was on a day when all of us were working full-time and were sleeping. Another time, he heard loud knocking at the door, and he asked all of us if it was one of us, but yeah, it was nobody. But anyway, these scratches and sneezes continue, and I freaked out in the first week, but I just kind of got used to it after a while and just ignored it. I didn't investigate further, thinking that there must be some sort of explanation for it. But now comes the part where things really got out of hand. So my grandmother vanished around 3 weeks ago. She lives in Moscow in Russia. She had a very good pension fund every month and lived by herself in a flat. My relatives didn't visit her a lot. She was alone a lot, but the crime scene in Russia is huge and not in control of the police. But when she vanished, my relatives and the police thought that a few criminals kidnapped her when she was outside the flat by herself, going grocery shopping or something like that, so that they could get the money monthly. The police found out that the money was regularly taken from her bank account, but when they investigated her flat, nobody was around and there was absolutely no trace of her. So after a few days of hearing these scratches, I come home and got on my computer, and what I experienced next was really odd. So I have like one favorite position when I sit on my chair in front of my desk. When I first sat there, everything was fine, but then I went quickly to the bathroom to fill up my bottle of water. The bathroom is right next to my room. So I went there, left both of the doors open, filled my bottle, and meanwhile I hear absolutely nothing. And neither did I see someone walk by or anything, but when I got back into my favorite position as always. And after a few seconds, I noticed that my socks were just soaking up with some cold water like fluid. I immediately got up and, of course, investigated. It really looked like water, and it honestly felt like it, but it smelled like nothing. At first, I thought it was piss or something from an animal, but there was absolutely nothing in my room. We have no floor heating, and the other heater, which is attached to the wall, is on the other side of the wall, and except for the only bottle that I took with me, I have no other bottles or fluid in my room. It couldn't have come from the wall because it was a few inches away from it, and it had quite a lot of it and was thick with water, like it was a lot. Also, the most mysterious thing is that the base of the puddle was basically unreachable, which I noticed when I was cleaning it up. The puddle was under a shelf, and the space in between the floor and the shelf was like 1 inch or even less. Which means that a bottle, if it was, for example, a prank from one of my flatmates or something, wouldn't even have had enough space to get down there in the first place. And so, that night was pretty awkward. There were more bad vibes than usual in my room for some reason, and that feeling that I just wasn't alone in my room was way more intense than normal. Of course, this could have all just been in my head, but I have 2 alarm clocks, one physical one and one on my phone. The alarm was set at 6:30 on both of them, and that morning the clocks rang. I woke up pretty exhausted and I switched the clocks off and get my phone to check Facebook, etc. Since I was super tired, I fell asleep again by accident. And when I woke up again after that second little nap that I took, I of course panicked since I thought that I was going to be late for work. But when I checked how late it was, the clock showed me that it was 6:20 a.m. I saw that both of the alarms were still set on 6:30 but turned off, which was really weird. And not only this, but on my phone, the apps were still open, so I was awake and must have switched the alarms off or something, but I swear that I did hear the alarms last night. Anyway, continuing on with the rest of the cases, the scratches and the sneezes continued. To my surprise, I didn't experience any sleep paralysis in this time, which again was strange, but we didn't hear anything from my granny. The police didn't put much effort into her case though, since it already was just an old woman. I knew that she was really religious and prayed for me and my brother regularly. I'm not religious at all, and honestly, I didn't believe in ghosts before this incident. But I think the paranormal activity in my room just got a lot worse because my grandmother wasn't able to pray for us anymore or something. It's just a thought, and I can't be sure, but I speculate that that might be the reason. So once, I didn't go to the toilet before sleeping one night, and this caused me to wake up at around 2 a.m. busting to go to the toilet. When I got back, I wanted to go back to sleep again, but this night I heard 2 knocks coming from my closet. Like, it was 100% in my room, and it would have sounded muffled and dulled, and I knew this too because I heard my flatmate next room moving in, talking in her room, drying her hair, etc. So I just tried to ignore it, and turned around in my bed so I didn't have to face the closet anymore. But then, again, I heard the knocking. This time there was 3 of them, and it was much more aggressive. I stood up at this and opened the closet, but as I expected, there was nothing there. Now, I want to talk about my 2 friends as well, which know every single detail about what's happened to me. I have contact to these 2 on a daily basis, but since I started telling them about my experiences, creepy stuff has started to happen at their place too. So my friend A told me that their house bell just sometimes ringed on the evening when she was around. On one occasion, the ring would stop for like 30 minutes. They got it off and changed the batteries, plugged it in somewhere else, but they would still hear the ring just randomly. My friend B actually started experiencing stuff as well. His computer would just start in the middle of the night, like my Wii. The ventilation in the bathroom would go on by itself, even though you have to actually switch it on by hand since it's an old house, and the cats would just go crazy every evening. I have to say that I can't guarantee that the story from friend A is true because I know it sounds a little bit weird, but I can guarantee that I witnessed a few things at B's house when I was around. So anyway, right now I'm moving out of the flat since I finished my apprenticeship this August. I got the keys to my new apartment yesterday and I started packing things up in my room right now. There were a lot of boxes and things stored under my bed. Everything was super dusty. So step by step I got everything out of there and I was at the point where almost everything was out, except the last few boxes and a scrap of paper. I got the paper and noticed that it was a photograph of a boy. It was very wrinkled and it smelled a bit like smoke. I knew that it smelled like house fire almost instantly because my ex-boyfriend's house actually burned down and they still saved some of their family pictures, and they smelled exactly the same way. I noticed the smell immediately on this photo and I started crying and called both friend A and B. Like, I was shaking pretty badly and I felt really unsafe being in my room by myself. Like, why was all this bullcrap happening to me? I mean, who was this boy in this photo, and where did this photo even come from? I investigated the picture further though, and it was tattered on all sides. The paper was fully printed on one side, and on the other, there was a handprint. And it was a really tiny handprint, like it was from a child. But along the handprint, there were brown burnt parts. Upon seeing this too, I wanted to get it out of my room, but I couldn't throw it away since friend A wanted to see it the next day, which was going to be today. So I went downstairs and I placed it on the kitchen table since I knew that I'll walk past it the next morning to get my lunch and then I would see it and it would remind me. Also, just to note this as well, it couldn't have been from my previous tenant since my room was completely empty when I moved in. A month ago, I completely rearranged the furniture in my room as well, and I threw everything away that I didn't need anymore, and I cleaned the whole thing up, and I can assure you that this picture was not there. So, the rest of the evening felt really unpeaceful as well. I was pretty scared, and I had a bad feeling about every room in my house. Just bad vibes everywhere, if you catch my drift. I took a shower, and I remembered that I still had to close the balcony door because it was going to rain later on. So I went downstairs, and shortly before I could reach the floor downstairs, I heard steps and something which sounded like a keyring, I guess. You know how when two keys or more come together and they make like a jingling noise? My first thought, though, was that it must have been one of my roommates. From the stairs, you couldn't actually look into the kitchen, so I didn't know for sure, but it sure sounded like them, and I was 10,000% sure that somebody was there. Like, the sound was in this apartment, it was a few meters away from me, and it was like it was in the kitchen. I was sure that it was one of my flatmates that was down there. So I turned around and was about to go to my room again, since I didn't feel like talking to somebody at that moment. But before I made a step back up, I thought that I should say hi, because if I didn't, I would just have to come back down anyway again and say hi, so, I could just say hi now and avoid further conversation later. So I turned around again and I went to the kitchen. And it really messed with me when I saw that nobody, absolutely nobody, was down there. The windows were closed, the door was shut, and at this, I ran upstairs immediately and locked myself in my room. The furniture seemed to creak louder and more intense that evening as well. I don't know if that was just adrenaline rushing through me or if there was something going on, but it was strange nonetheless. After my hysteria, though, I did manage to fall asleep, surprisingly fast as well. But when I woke up, it honestly felt like I just hadn't slept at all. I think it was because regularly I woke up that night, having sort of mini panic attacks. The kind of thing that happens when you have a bad nightmare about falling and you just kind of are shook awake. But the strange thing is that I didn't really dream at all that night. But I still woke up multiple times with heavy beating hearts and shaking and sweating and just gasping for air. I can recall that this happened a few times that night as well, and I can recall after that I woke up and I walked aimlessly around my room for a few minutes, I think. I know that I did that as well, but I really can't remember why. And at this point, I'm actually a little bit afraid of myself. But anyway, like I said, the next morning I woke up with the feeling like I hadn't slept at all. Every bone and muscle was just aching, and I barely could open my eyes. When I got ready, I went downstairs to get my lunch, but I remembered the picture, and you probably guessed it, but it just wasn't there anymore. I don't believe that my flatmates took it too, because they always leave things lying around for weeks. Letters, food, dishes, and practically everything. So I'm pretty sure that it wasn't them. Plus, they would have asked me about it, I think. But the thing is that I didn't look at the table yesterday when I went into the kitchen and heard the footsteps, so I can't tell if this thing took it or not. Anyway, this whole experience has just been a roller coaster, and I know it's really weird. My grandma is still missing, and people are still looking for her, so there's that going on. I'm sorry for just how jumbled all this is and how crazy it sounds. I know, trust me, I know. But I thought that it was worth telling someone about this. I'll be moving out in a week, and I don't know if this thing is going to follow me or not, so I would really, really appreciate if somebody would help me. I work as a caretaker for a school building. Because my building is small, we only have 2 people there. One person works at 6 AM to 2:48 PM, and the second works from 2:42 PM to 11 PM. Sometimes there are people renting out the gym there, but after 10:30 they're always gone. And last night there was nobody there, so I'd been alone since the daycare left at 6 PM. Around 7:30, I had walked around the building's interior and checked that every window was shut, every door was locked, and there were no teachers still working in the building, so I knew I was 100% alone. Around 11, I was finishing up my shift. Our exit is a door in our storage room, and there's an alarm panel right by the door so we can set the alarm, and the door leads right out to the parking lot. Now, right outside the storage room is a set of double doors that also lead outside. They are typically used by staff, and as I waited for it to hit 11, I heard movement and men's voices outside. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I decided I'd listen for them to leave and get on the phone with a friend while I walked out to my car. But suddenly, at the double doors beside the storage room, I heard someone start pulling and pushing at the door, trying to get it open. After a bit of that, I heard, "I guess she's not here." Keep in mind, this is a male-dominated field, so if they didn't know who was working, they would have assumed that it was a he. I called my supervisor to check if there was a legitimate reason why someone might be trying to get in, and there wasn't, then stayed on the phone with him until I got to my car safely. Now, there are some security cameras, but only the principal can access them. So the next day, we looked at them, and it was even creepier than I'd expected. There were two men, late teens, early 20s, and they came in from the car park behind the building, walk up the side, directly to the doors, try them, stand there for a second, and then walk back the way that they come. It was really weird, but my gut tells me that they may have been watching me for some time out there. This happened about 4 years ago, back when I was a lot younger and desperate for money. It was a Friday, and my girlfriend and I wanted to go to the local casino with one of our friends, just to have some drinks and lose a bit of cash on the slots. It was a cheaper alternative to going out and drinking, since you could just spend $10 and drink for free the whole night, as long as you just keep playing the slots. So we got there at around 6 p.m, my girlfriend and her friend dressed in their best, and me just kind of slapped together into something a bit better than just woke up. I was the only male in the group, and while I was quite slender at the time, I also had a full beard and a shaven head, so it would have been pretty difficult to mistake me for a female. We played the slots until about midnight, taking full advantage of the free drinks, and I was the designated driver, so I just drank Coke the entire night while my girlfriend and her friend got absolutely wasted. Once the last of the money that we brought with us ran out, we decided to just call it quits and go home. The parking lot is on the further side of the casino, and we were parked on the 3rd floor. The casino's parking lot was 4 stories high, and you could either take the stairs on the left or up an elevator on the right. On each floor there was a massive sliding door that led to the parking lot once you got up there. As we made our way towards the stairwell, though, some chubby guy in a trench coat stumbled up to me, clearly drunk, and put his arm around my shoulder. I'm quite a friendly person, so I just kind of stood there and waited to see what this person wanted before I just shrugged him off. He had greasy, curly black hair, and I remember his breath just smelled like cigarettes. My girlfriend and her friend just kind of hanged back, silently laughing at me, since this kind of thing happens often to me. For some reason, drunk people just really like me. He leaned in closer to me and told me that he just won big and couldn't remember where he parked his car. He pulled out a big wad of cash from his pocket and told me that if I could help him find his car, that he'll give me $1,000. I was absolutely floored, since that was the most cash that I had ever seen in my life, and so I agreed to it immediately. We walked towards the parking lot together, his arm still around my shoulder and his weight leaned onto me. My plan was to search the 1st floor with his car keys and go up to the next level if we don't find it. He had his arm around me the whole time as we made our way to the entrance of the lot, my girlfriend and her friend going towards the stairs as me and the guy walked towards the entrance to level 1. The whole time he was just talking really loudly to me, his words slurring as he stumbled around the place. But the moment my girlfriend and her friend ducked out of sight, he tightened his grip around my neck, looked me in the eyes, and said, $1,000 for finding my car and anal. He tightened his grip even further and tried to grab my arm, not slurring any of those words. I was stunned for a second as he started pulling me towards the elevator, his hand still trying to grab for my arm. Luckily, I used to do MMA for a few years when I was younger, so I knew how to get out of a grapple, and those long hours of training kicked in. I slipped my head out from his arm and pulled myself free before he could tighten his grip further. He frantically tried to grab me again, his fingernails racking across the skin of my arm as I pulled it back from him and took a few steps away. And immediately, he stood up straight and hurriedly walked through the door to level 1, his drunken stumble completely gone as he ducked out of sight. I ran back to my friends in the stairwell, who saw the entire thing, and were laughing their heads off thinking about how funny the whole situation was. When they saw that he left deep scratches on my arm when I broke free, though, they realized just how serious the situation was. It's scary to think that they would have probably just stood there and watched me get taken, thinking that it was just some drunk guy messing with me. So I saw this about 4 years ago at work, and it really creeped me the hell out. I work for a digital surveillance company that runs the eye in the sky for thousands of restaurants, bars, and gas stations across the US. And from time to time, we get calls for investigations to look into robberies and theft, etc. So one day, we get a call from a popular fast food chain located in the heart of Detroit. They say an employee OD'd by the dumpster, and they needed us to get some answers on the situation. First, basically, what happened and how long he was there. But the next question is where it starts to get weird. You see, the dumpsters had a brick wall around it. It had 2 entrances to the dumpster, a gate that you had to pass when you walked out the back door, and the big gates where the garbage truck has access to the dumpster to empty it out. They claimed that those big gates were always open, and the small gate by the back door was locked from the inside. Nobody ever used that smaller gate, but the weird thing was that when the body was found, an employee walked out, and that gate that was never open was indeed open, and the body was sitting there on full display. So their question was, who the hell opened that gate? So we downloaded the footage. Now, one night, the employee goes outside, throws out the trash, and you can kind of see him through the locked gate that was never open. It was see-through, but very difficult to actually see, though. The way the camera was angled, you could just kind of see over the top also. And he injects himself, slumps over, and keels over dead behind the dumpster. He was out there for 2.5 days. No employees ever come to look for him. It's pouring rain both days, and for 2 days, employees come and go taking out the trash and not seeing him. But then, on the 3rd day in the morning sunshine, clear as day, the gate just slowly opens by itself. Nobody comes, nobody goes. The gate just opens by itself, and the body is there in the same position it was 2.5 days earlier. I literally felt chills down my spine when I saw this too. And to this day, I just simply cannot explain it without thinking that it was actually paranormal. Anyway, a couple of hours later, an employee walks out with a trash bag, sees the body, freaks out, and calls the cops. I didn't write it, but we basically had to write a report on how a gate apparently just opened itself. Last Thanksgiving, I was driving home from college with my friend, both 21 and female at the time. I live in a very isolated part of Arkansas that requires driving through an hour of hairpin turns in the mountains. There are lots of blind spots, and the whole time you're driving on the edge of just huge drop-offs with no barriers. I'm usually pretty confident driving through the mountains, but we were in my friend's car, so I was going slower than usual, driving about 5 over the speed limit. So, almost as soon as we started the roughest part of the drive, another car was tailgating us pretty close. This was stressing me out, and as soon as I saw somewhere that I could pull over, I did. I pulled into a church parking lot, and my friend offered to drive the rest of the way, but I declined as it was completely dark and she had never driven this route before. We got back on our way, though, and a few minutes later, I have to come to a screeching halt as there's a car stopped in the middle of the road. It wasn't on the shoulder at all, but just stopped dead in the middle of the road. My friend is saying that they must have broken down, but can't call a tow because there's no service in this area. I, on the other hand, immediately have a bad feeling and lock the doors. I tell my friend to stay in the car no matter what, as she's starting to get scared at this point and points out that she thinks it was the car that was following us. I can't tell, but I'm pretty scared at this point. It's parked right before a hairpin turn too, so I can't pass it. My friend starts frantically telling me to go ahead and pass it, but I don't want to get hit by a Mack truck or fall off the mountain or something. So I honk my horn. Nothing happens. No chance of calling for help as there's no cell service, like I said, so we just wait there for a while, doing nothing. My friend is crying and freaking out, but I'm too scared to try and pass them. I honk a couple of times, and eventually a guy gets out of the car, comes around back, and leans against his car, just staring at us. My friend is freaking out even more, and I'm just frozen. I tell her not to make eye contact. I'm ready to floor it if he does something, but he just stands there, staring. Mind you, he's not checking his car or anything either. I try to stay calm and just pray that another car will come along soon. This goes on for what seems like forever, but was probably 15 plus minutes. He's just casually leaning against his car, just looking at us. Eventually we see car lights in our rear view, and then the guy jogs to his door and gets back in his car. He speeds off, going dangerously fast, so there was obviously nothing wrong with his car. I start driving, not wanting to cause a wreck. We don't see anything else for a while, but we pass the same car parked along the highway a while later, and it pulls back on and starts tailing us again. I try to speed up and get rid of him, but he just keeps following us. We have cell service at this point, but I don't know if we should call the cops because, well, nothing really happened. I call home and I tell my brothers what's going on and tell them to wait on the porch for us. And the car follows me all the way home, down the really long drive to my house as well. I get to my house and my two brothers are waiting on the porch holding their deer rifles. I pull in and the car just goes to the end of the drive, loops around, and speeds off back the way it came. We tried to catch its plates, but we just couldn't make them out in the dark like that. Needless to say, me and my friend were really freaked out, but when I told other friends the whole story, they just didn't think it was a big deal. What do you guys think happened that night? This happened a few years ago when I was maybe 15 or 16. I used to not have blinds or curtains on my windows, and I never bothered to get something to cover them up for a long time. My street is fairly rural, and we know all of our neighbours fairly well, so I was never really worried about something weird happening. That is, until this night. It was sometime in the winter. I've always been a bit of a night owl, so I was up late on my computer. I had the light in my room on, but it was pitch black outside, so I couldn't see anything out the window. It was completely silent in my house when I heard it. 3 loud bangs on my window. It scared me so bad that I fell off my bed and I stayed down there for a while. Eventually, I convinced myself that it must have been some kind of an animal, like a bat or something, that just flew into my window. I calmed myself down and I went back to whatever the hell I was doing, and I didn't really think much of it after that. I just never bothered to mention it to anyone, until a few nights later around the same time. I had my window cracked open, still with no blinds covering it, when I heard leaves crunching outside like somebody was walking on them. They stopped right outside of my window, but it was still too dark for me to see what was out there. At this point, I probably should have screamed for my parents or called the police or something, because I could just feel someone just staring directly at me, and I could feel that they had bad intentions. I was too scared to even move, but I just knew somehow that there was someone out there. So I did the only thing that I could think of at the time. I stared directly into the pitch blackness outside of the window, put on the most intimidating face that I could manage, and stayed like that. I must have sat in that position for a good 5 minutes until I heard the footsteps again, this time leading away from my window. I shut the window and tacked a blanket around it after I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore, and I barely slept that night. The next day, I bought a pair of blinds and told my mum about the incident when we were at the store. I said to her that I heard footsteps outside my window last night. My mum doesn't get scared or intimidated easily, as she's one of the most fearless people I know, in fact. But as soon as those words left my mouth, she just turned white. She said, "Did you tell your dad about that?" And I told her no, I hadn't told my dad, and asked why she wanted to know. She looked me straight in the eyes and told me just one of the most bone-chilling things that I've ever heard. "Honey, your dad was talking to our neighbor this morning. She told him that she had seen a man walking around our yard for the past few nights. And last night she saw him walking towards your window, but he disappeared into the dark before she could figure out if it was one of us or not. She said after a few minutes that he left apparently, but he came back a few hours later and she saw him while getting ready for work. She knew then that it wasn't one of us this time since the sun was coming up, and he also had a knife in his hand. She went outside and screamed for him to leave, but instead of running down the street, he ran into our backyard and then into the woods. I live in a military neighborhood, and all of my neighbors are active duty, which tends to make me feel pretty safe if something were to happen, but after I just heard that there was a creepy man outside my window in the woods more than once, and that he ran into our backyard instead of down the street, I don't think any amount of military would make me feel safe after that. My parents never let me stay over at my boyfriend's house back then, but after that night, she let me stay at my boyfriend's house for almost a week. And when I got back home, my blinds were installed and there was a curtain over the window, and the window lock that was previously broken was now fixed. I haven't unlocked or opened that window since this happened, and we never saw or heard about this guy again. My neighbor never saw anything again, and we just reported the incident, but never heard anything about it after that. I don't know who he was or what he looked like, but I sure hope that he doesn't come back. I live on an island where most people live near the coast, but my childhood house was deep in the mountains. Imagine a house in the woods, but at the very top of a mountain if you can. The house is surrounded by thick mist every night, like in the bad horror movies, and the woods around it start less than 2 feet from the outer walls of the house. Our closest neighbor is a 15-minute drive away, and 5 minutes away there's also an abandoned house. I think the house belonged to a distant relative or something, but was abandoned more than 40 years ago. There's no streetlights, and there's all kinds of animals roaming the area. This is important to the story because even though you couldn't see a group of 10 people hiding like 1 meter away from you in the woods, you could hear absolutely everything right up to a couple of kilometers away, in fact. If we saw car lights or heard a car approaching, me and my family would turn off the lights and we would hide. I don't know why, we were just shy and antisocial, you name it. But anyway, I think that's enough to set the story up. I'll add some details along the way that may be important. But my house is small and impoverished, and our family car was a good one. I don't really know much about cars, but my dad always said that without a really good car, we wouldn't be able to go up and down the mountain that we lived in. Also, there's currently 8 people inside of our house around 11 p.m. So, I'm at the dining table just enjoying some cereal while I'm watching some anime. Basically just kind of having the time of my life. The lights to the house were on, so nothing could be seen in the dark outside. There's a window in front of me that gives sight to the front of the entrance of the house and onto the road. And just then, something calls my attention, but I don't hear or see anything. I think that I see a human silhouette outside, but it doesn't move, so I just ignore it as some effect of the lights in the house and my own reflection or something. More anime, more cereal, and I feel something move at the other side of the window, and this time, the silhouette is waving at me. I felt my heart jump out of my chest and I froze. The person outside waves at me as if trying to make sure that nobody else in the house is noticing him. After maybe 10 seconds, in which I'm just looking at him with a spoon halfway to my mouth, he decides to say hello. He then says, "I need help." My parents hear this and they approach the window, which made me sure that I wasn't just looking at a ghost, which was amazing news for me. But the man outside starts telling a story about how he got his car stolen at gunpoint and needs help. My parents are surprised that nobody heard his footsteps or a car or anything, so they whisper their theories amongst themselves. For this mysterious guy's story to be true, he had to be mugged more than a mile away, get his car stolen, and then walk for half an hour in the dark through the woods, following the dim light of our house. It may sound crazy, but my parents decided to actually believe him and they offer calling the police. But our visitor begs and says the stupidest thing that he could have. He says, "Don't call the police, I don't have a gun." My parents stay silent for a while. The guy outside knows that he's messed up, but proceeds to make his request. He asks, "Can I get a ride downtown?" My dad nervously chuckles and gives him some sort of an excuse. He mentions the time, the fact that he felt the guy was lying and that he had already called the police, which was a lie in fact. And this is when my favorite part of the story begins. I stand up from the table, shaking. I go to a closet, and even though I can't see the guy's face, I know that he's following my actions. I get 2 machetes that are half my size and run to another room. I was terrified, and looking back, I probably took away the only weapons my parents could have used to protect themselves in case of an altercation. But I opened the door to my room where me and my siblings sleep, and they were watching some silly show, probably something stupid like Hannah Montana or iCarly, and their hyena laughter came out. My sisters are really loud, and my younger brothers are 4 years old, 7 years old, and 9 years old, so their laughs are angelical by day and demonic by night. But I signal at them to shut the hell up, and they do so, joining me and my parents in our fear. We sit there in silence as the guy says, "It's okay. If you can't help me, I'll just go to the next house, alright?" My dad says, "There is no next house. You should wait for the police here." "I don't need the police. I'm good." This goes back and forth. The guy is now in good shape apparently to walk an hour down the mountain to reach downtown. My dad offers a rusty metal tricycle from our porch so that he can go downtown as a bit of a joke. And the guy accepts this offer and grabs the tricycle. I assume that he just wanted to leave with something. But this tricycle is like 20 years old and it definitely doesn't work now. We hear the screeching of the tricycle for a couple of seconds as the stranger just struggled to be able to ride it, and then it stopped not too far away from our house. At least, it seemed like he stopped, and we didn't hear any footsteps that indicated the guy had left. And after trying to identify if he was still on site to no avail, my dad finally calls the police. We wait in silence, looking at the road from the front windows. 15 minutes later, the police get there, which was an amazing time back home, heroic even. And as soon as the red and blue lights show up, they illuminate the entire road up to the abandoned house. The tricycle is still on the road not too far away. The police claim not seeing anybody on the road. There's only one road into the mountain, and if the guy kept on walking, they definitely would have seen him. So they take a look in the woods with a flashlight, and after that, they just called it a day. The cops were clearly freaked out by the eerie look of the house, though, and they didn't stay for more than 5 minutes. Luckily, nothing else happened that night, and I slept with 2 machetes under my pillow, which I remember angered one of my sisters. But to this day, we have no idea who the person was. There were no carjackings reported the next day, and even though a lot of weird things happened around my house, we never saw this guy again. It's pretty obvious he was trying to steal our family's car, but there were a few things that we could just never understand. Like, where the hell did he come from? Where the hell did he go as well? If his story was true, he had the worst luck in the world, I suppose. I think the situation was interesting, though, because I often think about his point of view and how Horror Night turns a bit, well, comical. I mean, imagine this. You go to rob a house, turns out the people inside speak calmly. I don't know how much criminals encounter this as they try to intimidate or deceive. There's a scrawny, seemingly mute kid that tries to be sneaky and grabbing some machetes and then hide in the darkness in the house. And then there's child's laughter coming from non-visible rooms from the house. He could see the doors, but the inside of the rooms would be geometrically impossible to look into from the windows. And in the end, I think that we were lucky to kind of out-creep the creep that night. Because I just don't see any other reason for the guy to back out from his plans. The guy clearly had a gun and bad intentions, not to mention his ability to ninja walk through a forest where we even heard wild cats walking around. And also, no neighbors to witness or hear anything. Prior to 2016, I lived in Palmdale, California. My sister Honey and my youngest daughter lived with my mother in a rented townhouse apartment in Oxford, about 2 hours away. Every week or two, I made the long drive to take them shopping and clean their house because they were both disabled. My mother was my heart and my sweet sister helped raise me, so anything they needed, I was always there for them. On the first floor, the kitchen was in the back with a door that opened to the backyard, then a big open space, and then the living room and the front door. On the right was the bathroom and my mother's bedroom. The stairs were on the left with a half-wall railing going up to the first landing. My mum was sitting in her lift recliner on the right facing the base of the stairs. One night we were all sitting in the living room just watching a show with the lights on, and my daughter was upstairs in her room. We were laughing at something we saw on the TV when I saw something on the stairs. It darted down the steps real fast, picking up at me, and then ducked back down behind the railing, followed by just a cold chill that entered the living room. My mother even commented that it was cold and put her robe together. At first, I thought it was my daughter playing tricks on me, but when she didn't pop up, I honestly felt concerned. So I said, "Mama, did you see something?" Because she had full sight of anything there. She said, "No, dear, I thought that I did, but there's nothing there." That's when it hit me, and instinctively, I just knew what it was and where it even came from. I ran up the stairs and burst into my daughter's room, and I said, "What did you do?" She looked at me with her eyes wide. She knew exactly what I was referring to and started apologizing. I told her, tell me what she did to bring it into this house, and she proceeded to tell me that when her girlfriends were there that they thought it would be fun to try and summon a spirit. Then they tried to reach the father of one of her friends who passed away 2 years prior, but she said something else came through and it scared them, so they stopped and her friends ran home without even saying goodbye. And well, I was furious. I said, "How dare you play with something you don't understand?" I told her that I knew that she was just trying to help her friend, but for heaven's sake, I warned her years ago to never mess around with things that she didn't understand and had no control over. I was thinking that not only do I constantly worry about my family's health now, but I have to worry about this. I asked if she at least closed the door, and she just looked at me with a blank stare, and obviously she didn't. She said that they made a Ouija board out of paper and that when they were done, she just ripped it up and threw it away. I told her that that door had to be closed. So we gathered the pieces and she called her friends. 2 of them were too scared to come back, so we had to perform the closing without them, but in the back of my head, I knew that it didn't work and it was still there hiding somewhere. At that point, there was nothing that I could have done viewing the circumstances at the time. So fast forward to 2016. I had an opportunity waiting for me in Washington State, so I begged and pleaded for my mother and sister to go with me, but my sister Honey was fanatically scared of change, and although my mother desperately wanted to go with me, she just couldn't leave my sister's side. I wish now that I would have been more persistent. So I moved, reluctantly leaving them with my daughter and her now husband to take over their care. And within those 2 years, my elder sister Honey's health severely declined, and my mother shared with me 8 months after I moved that she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. I flew and drove back and forth to be with them, and every time I showed them pretty pictures of my new life and our beautiful green surroundings, asking them to return with me, and every time, Honey would say that she was just too apprehensive to leave and said no. And in 2018, they both passed away. My mother from cancer and my sister from an existing illness. taking a big part of my heart and my soul with them. My daughter and her husband moved out, leaving all of my mother and sister's things there. Somebody had to put their stuff in storage, and of course it had to be me. And even though I was the youngest of 6, I felt it was my duty. I drove there with my 2 grandchildren, 8 and 4, because at the time there was just no one available to watch them. And when we arrived, the place was just in shambles. Dirty dishes and mouldy food lined the counters and was piled up in the sink, and it looked like soot just all over the floor. Mum and Honey's personal belongings were strewn around the house, and in my mother's room, a barricade of trash was piled up all the way to her door. In the middle of the floor in the open space was a full-length mirror that I had never seen before, just hanging off of a wooden ladder. And quite honestly, I just stood there and I cried. I set up a clean spot in the living room for my grandson to play on his tablet with, and my granddaughter wanted to help. As I was bagging things up in the kitchen, I noticed her just standing there staring into the mirror. I didn't think anything of it, but she just kept standing there. Then I heard her say to me while not looking away, "Nana, can you get rid of this mirror?" I thought she wanted to move it, but she was adamant that it had to be taken out of the house. I asked her why she looked so scared, and she told me that while she was looking into the mirror, she was standing there alone, and she couldn't see anything in the reflection around or behind her, just darkness all around her, and she felt like something was coming. I looked at the mirror too, not at myself, and I must admit that it did look very dark. It was strange because it really shouldn't have been, but it was. So, say no more. Not only did I take it outside, but I smashed it into a million pieces and threw it in the trash can. We decided to sleep in the living room, and it took days to even come close to being done. But this happened on the last night, and we were alone. I just mopped downstairs, so I locked the doors and all the windows in the whole house, and we slept upstairs in the bedroom across from my daughter's old room. We hunkered down on some mattresses on the floor, and I always left a light on in the hall. I'm reading a book online. My granddaughter had fallen to sleep next to me, and my grandson was on his tablet at the end of the bed. I was getting sleepy, and my grandson started to yawn. He looked up from his tablet, and his eyes got big, and he ran to the door and shouted, "Spooky," and slammed it, running back to me quickly and got under the covers and got as close to me as he could, making me feel really uneasy. And when I looked, I could see movement in the hall, dimming the light around and under the door, making swirling strange shapes as if someone were pacing, followed by surges of blackness and wisps of cool air coming from the space under the door. And that night was long, and I felt on guard until I finally fell asleep as well, but I woke up hours later and had to go to the bathroom, but I was just too scared. I was just laying there waiting until daybreak, but I just couldn't wait any longer. So I slowly opened the door, fearing for what was waiting for me on the other side, but when I did, there was nothing. But at the same time, I just knew that there was something there. I could feel it. I tried to be as fast as I could, and I left the bathroom door open so that I could hear the kids, and then I ran back. Hearing a swoosh behind me, I slammed the door and laid holding the kids until daybreak. I received a call from my sister later that morning, and she couldn't understand how we would have been able to stay in that house. When I asked her why, she told me that when she was there grabbing some boxes of pictures, she heard noises coming from my daughter's room upstairs. She said that it was loud and she just felt like an evil presence, and everything inside of her just told her to leave, and so she did. She also told me that my son-in-law, from which I had no knowledge of at the time, was practicing some black magic and summoning dark energy in that room, which obviously was not cool. But late that afternoon, when everything was done, the kids were in the car and the car was packed, I just wanted to look at my mother's bedroom one last time where she used to sleep. These walls held just so many memories. I felt like if I looked hard enough too, I would see her laying where the bed had been, and in my mind telling me just not to cry. But as I stood there in the doorway, a chill just went up my spine, and the hairs on the back of my neck and my arms started to raise, and I could feel something closing in on me. And then I'll never forget this as long as I live. In my ear, I felt a warm breath and heard one loud word, and it said, "Run." And boy, did I run out of that house so fast, not even bothering to lock the door. And, to top it all off, as we were driving off, my granddaughter asked me who that was, standing in the window upstairs. The desert is a scary place for me now. It used to be a place filled with peace and serenity, but since living out there for almost 30 years, you see things. This occurrence took place in the high desert of California in the mid-90s. The whole town was once all military. There's a military plant there and a prison. The streets to this day consist of numbers and letters. An example would be Avenue O with 178th Street. You always heard noises of people missing and underground tunnels, which are confirmed here. In fact, a friend of mine kept getting a draft coming from his closet in his childhood home. And later, after he grew up, he checked it out and found an opening to one of these such tunnels. He actually called me over to check it out, but I was too freaked out to go more than 10 feet in when I turned around and just told him that this might be how people disappear. You always saw things late at night off in the distance, far past the lights of that then small town. Strange glowing lights that shot straight up and things in the sky, just stuff you never talked about, really. But life was carefree back then. If you wanted to visit friends, though, you would have to drive down long desert roads and sometimes end up coming home late at night in the pitch black because there were no streetlights. I remember coming home late one night with my boyfriend at the time and another friend, and we pulled over for some reason. I don't know why, but something just compelled me to get out of the car and look up at the stars. We were in the middle of nowhere, but we could hear what sounded like machinery and muffled clanks, like from metal or something. We all started looking around, but we just didn't see anything. But just then, we felt a vibration under our feet. I crouched down on the street and put my ear to the ground, and it was coming from under us. We all listened intently and heard far down voices, but couldn't make out what was being said. We all stood up and were discussing what it might have been when we saw a small red light on the horizon, and it was getting closer. We piled into the car, and at that point, we just got out of Dodge. But we only told a few friends, and they experienced the same thing, which was weird. A year later, I told a friend that I had started a small hauling business, but there was a big job, so I needed to borrow a trailer. And he said that he had a few that I could use, so I should come out to his property and check them out. It was just starting to get dark when we pulled out this new toy. It was military-grade night vision binoculars, and he told me to wait until it got dark to leave because he wanted to show me something creepy. And I was all in. So later, we walked to the back of his property, looking out at pretty much nothing. No lights, no roads, nothing but barren desert. He pointed the binoculars east, and oh my, there were people out there coming out of the ground and moving around. I said, "What the hell am I looking at?" And he told me that his family called them ground dwellers, and they're located in various parts of the desert. It honestly gave me the heebie-jeebies, and needless to say, I never went to his house after dark again after that. Now, at one point, we were living in a mobile home park past Avenue F. There was a huge treehouse in my yard left by the former renter, and the only way to get up into it was a hole that was cut into the tree with a door on it. Under that was a rope ladder, and one night I was sitting on the porch just drinking a cup of tea when I heard something move up the treehouse and then a head pop up. It was a lady and her husband hiding. Clearly, I thought that they were on drugs, and I told them to come down from there, but they didn't want to. It wasn't until I threatened to call the authorities did they cautiously comply, looking all around, not wanting to be seen. By now, there was a small group of my friends and nosy neighbors gathered around. I saw that she was terrified by something, though, so I asked them to come in, and I made them something to eat and waited for her to calm down. She pulled out these papers, looked like legal documents with government letterheads or something. Some of them had embossed seals, and they had smoke damage with a few of them even burnt on the edges. She told me that they were checking out this place off of Barrel Springs Road. There were 2 or 3 cinder block structures there, and I knew them well. A few years back, I happened upon that place, and a black truck rushed down to greet me with guns drawn. She said that the same thing happened to her, but she was in one of the structures, so she grabbed some things, and her and her husband just ran. I went over these pages and felt really uneasy reading them, like this was stuff people get killed over if it got out. Stupidly, I said, "Why don't you just simply give them back?" She said that they'd been running, and everywhere they stop, a black car or van with government plates show up and sit there just watching them. Well, I really didn't want to get involved with this, especially after reading what I did. It was too big for little old me, and I'll take what I saw to my death, so I packed them a lunch and told them that they could sleep in the treehouse for the night. And they did, but they were gone early the next morning. After that, too, we started seeing black vans parked in our lonely road facing the house. At one point, I was so fed up of seeing them that I just went up to one, but they took off as I knocked on their blacked-out driver's window. The things kept happening out there in the desert, too, but you don't see much now. I think that this is probably because there's more lights and people now. Towns and cameras and phones pointing everywhere, too. But there weren't cell phones back then to call for help and video and whatnot. Anyway, on another day we were having a bit of fun. Some friends and I were in this stupid little red car called a Yugo that seemed to be on its last legs most of the time. And my friend's uncle had told him that there was a whole abandoned town far west from here. And there were things just left there all over the place too. And we were so dumb. It took us a long time to get out there, thinking that we were lost a few times. And then we started seeing some things. A carnival ticket booth on a trailer, broken tractors and furniture, little shacks here and there, and empty water bottles just everywhere. There wasn't a store or place of business for many, many miles. I wondered how anyone could even survive in a place like this, and that was when we saw it. It was long and looked like a single wide mobile home, if you could ever call it a home, and it was between 60 to 80 feet long, and it was raised. It looked like something from a horror movie, if I'm being honest. It had windows lined all the way down the front of the house with old frayed curtains still hung up and blowing in the breeze. There were open sections of missing siding under the house, and there were dusty cars with their doors and trunks open cans and trash just all over the place, and a small fire pit in the middle of this. And one of the guys that I was with, his girlfriend and I, we saw people not wearing any clothes inside that house, and they were watching us from the windows and from the open spaces under. They were following us as we were driving the length of the house too, and they almost looked inhuman. They had really big eyes and really pale skin, much too pale for the desert. But he pulled up next to the fire pit, and despite us screaming to go, he turned off the car, and his girlfriend began to cry out that we have to leave right now. He didn't see what we saw, and he said, "Stop, babe, this stuff is cool." Man, I wanted to punch the guy. We both kept looking at the people watching us while begging him to start the car back up. He picked up a long bone and was moving the spot around and said, "Hey, it looks like somebody cooked a dog." And just then, he looked up as his girlfriend leaned over the driver's seat and grabbed his jacket, and he saw, finally, what we were seeing, and said, "Oh shit," quote. This thing under the house was just swaying back and forth with its hands on both sides of the opening, just staring at us, almost with intent to lunge. When we all saw this, he tried to start the car, but it failed. Thinking, too, that this was my end, eaten in the desert, I started to beat on the back of his seat, screaming, "Please start this thing." And after 3 tries, it started, and we just tore out of there, leaving a cloud of dust. Eventually, we pulled over far from that location and tried to compose ourselves. We didn't talk about what we saw after that, even in the car trip home, because I think that we were in disbelief that it even happened. There were so many things that occurred in the desert back in the day, too many to even come close to tell you guys, but I do believe that there are things that we just do not understand, or maybe never will understand. Just a tidbit of information too. Rosemond, way back in the day, was a toxic dump site. That's why the houses were so cheap, but if you ask anyone now, they just don't know what you're talking about. This story literally just happened this morning at around 6 a.m. I feel the need to share it too because it's just been on my mind all day. So, I was leaving for work this morning. I had to be there early, so it was still pitch black outside. And there was not a lot of lighting on my street, so you really can't see anything without headlights or a flashlight of some kind. So I get into my car and drive to the end of my street and come to a stop at the stop sign. And just then I noticed that there was a woman standing on the other side of the street, just standing there. At this point, I probably hang at the stop sign for a couple of seconds because now I'm a little concerned that there's a woman just standing on the side of the street in total darkness. Weird, right? And then she notices me. This is where it starts to get a bit scary too, because she turns to look at me and just out of nowhere starts sprinting full speed at my car. This isn't even like normal running we're talking about as well. Her arms are way out to her sides, and the only way I can really describe it is like a zombie would run in a video game or something. And she was going fast too. All I know is that she was definitely coming straight at me, and she looked like she wanted to hurt me as well. I went into full panic mode. I hit the gas pedal so hard. I must have been going like 60 in a residential area. But at that point, I just did not care. But once I got a little distance away, I looked in the rear view, and I can still just barely see her chasing right after my car. And that was the end of the story. She was going fast, but of course she couldn't catch up with my car, and I got away. But man, it was a terrifying way to start a day, I tell you. I have no idea who this lady was or what her intentions were or anything. All I know is that it's left some fear in my bones. So this all started at a convention and is technically still ongoing. My boyfriend, Damien, was dressed as a character from a game that isn't too well known, so we both assumed that no one would recognize him. But lo and behold, about halfway through the second day, we hear someone call and say the character's name, and we see someone dressed as another person from that game come bounding towards us with a friend in tow. They introduce themselves, and I'll call the cosplayer Rena and their friend Hilda, and we all started chatting. We became fast friends, and we spent the rest of the con just hanging out. When it came time to leave, we exchanged Discord info and would continue to talk to each other daily. Damien and I, as well as Rena, all decided to head to another con together near the end of October. As the days progressed, Rena became infatuated with both Damien and I. Mostly Damien, but I don't think that they would have admitted that. Neither of us acknowledged the warning signs, and they became comfortable with us after only knowing us for a week. But they would constantly tell us that they loved us, despite not really knowing us. Whenever we would hang out, they would act as if we were dating as well. They would also cling to Damien's arm in public, and give evil eyes to anyone who got even close. They called themselves obsessive, telling us that all of their previous relationships had failed for a good reason, and insisting that we would learn to hate them eventually. We ignored all of this, and I tried to convince them that they were hurting themselves with negative thoughts and that they were worthy of love. I believe my first mistake was telling them that I actually loved them. I'm going to tell you that I love you if I think you're a good person, but that's just something that I do, but they really took it to heart, and not in a good way. We enabled them, consoling them every single line that we spoke, because they always had something negative to say about themselves. Call me naive, but I want everyone to be happy and to get along and to love themselves. So when I see someone beating themselves up, I feel like I have to help them. Almost every other thing that Rena said was self-deprecating as well, and they explained to us that they were raised to think that they were useless and unlovable. They poured their heart out to us despite us barely knowing each other, and I respected that. I don't want to say that I pitied them, but I will admit that I felt bad, and I desperately wanted to help them to better themselves and to learn to be happy again. But no matter what I said or did for them, nothing ever really changed. The real red flags started popping up at the convention this month, though. But we just got back from it today, and boy, was it a wild ride. We didn't get to do anything that we had originally planned. Rena was fixated on the idea that they had come with us to this convention simply in order to have sex with Damien. They didn't even care about the con itself. They just wanted to be with us as often as possible. And they wanted to get intimate with a man they hardly knew anything about. Damien ended up having to fake being in a bad mood every time that they brought it up, just to get them to drop it. It upset me greatly to see him like that, and because I have a tendency to take others' emotions onto myself, I had an awful time at the con that I normally would have enjoyed. He didn't get the chance to tell me that he was faking it, because every time he tried to tell me or message me about it, there Rena was, getting all up in his space. They gave us presents while we were there, though. I got a lovely necklace, which I now wear with my other ones, and Damien got a bottle full of little pill capsules, each adorned with a different smiley face and each containing a unique love letter. Rena had insisted that he open at least one of them while we were there at the convention, but he told them that he didn't want to. And in the hotel bed that night, Rena told us that they were going to kill themselves so that they wouldn't have to leave us, among other things. I can barely recall the conversation as I was so freaked out by what they were saying, but they were behaving in a really threatening and manipulative manner. But we had to bring Rena to Hilda's house after the con, and Damien's car stalled and got flooded because of a bad storm. And Rena's response to this was to have a complete breakdown and scream and cry about how they ruin every life that they walk into, and how they were awful people and that they should just end themselves. We were stranded there for over 3 hours, and not once did they stop. It was the most uncomfortable thing that I've been in for a very long time. Now, initially when we had got home, he decided that he would just throw the love letter bottle away, and my curiosity got the better of me though, and I convinced him to open it. Some of them were really sweet, like, I love your cute nose, and I love your soft warm hugs, but then others were really unsettling. I love that each passing day is another day closer to you. I love making you need me as much as I need you. I love when you tell me that you love me, but I want you to need me. And the real kicker, I love knowing that you couldn't leave me if you tried. That was the last straw for both of us. It's been building up since we'd met Rena for the first time, and it's definitely escalating in a dangerous direction now. I've really come to hate the nicknames that they give me, and we want to let them down easy so as to not provoke them, because, to be honest, at this point, they really scare me. They know where Damien lives, and they're going to be moving out here next year. All we can really do at this point is pray that they don't do anything rash. So this happened really recently. I've called and reported it to the police, and I'm home safely, but I guess that I'm still in shock. So I finished work early today and decided to go out for a run. I set out around 4:30 and decided my usual route, which crosses many roads, will not be very practical, and so I took an alternate route along a canal towpath and some pathways through woods that I knew would be less busy. Everything was going well. I was pushing myself steady until I got to a pathway on the way back around 6 k's out into the route. It's a long straight path with a canal on the left side, and on the right there is a wasteland where some factories used to be or something, but have mostly been demolished. It's been left abandoned for as long as I can remember, and is overgrown with trees and weeds, but there are the odd bits of an old factory that for some reason just weren't fully demolished. As I got level with one part of the factory, which still had some old metal fire escape steps attached to it, I noticed a rough-looking guy sat on the wall with his legs hanging down. He jumped to his feet as he saw me coming and shouted something, but I couldn't make it out. As I came level to where he was, I heard him say, "Wait there, can you help me find my phone?" He said this while he was running down the steps, and so I stopped as I got level with where the bottom of the steps were, meaning that we were standing just a few feet apart, but with a fence in between us. It was a really old iron fence with vertical metal bars that have spikes at the top like you sometimes see around churches and things. He asked me if I could help him with finding his phone again, saying that he had dropped it somewhere nearby, and asked if I could ring his number so that he could listen for it. I felt like I couldn't exactly refuse, as my phone was strapped to my arm. So I said he could tell me the number, and I took my phone off my arm and unlocked it. He blurted out some phone number, but said it far too fast, and it didn't begin with 07, which made me start to feel like just something wasn't right. And although I was beginning to suspect at this point, I wasn't too worried. I'm in pretty good shape, and I had a big size and weight advantage over him. Plus, there was a fence between us. He didn't seem in very good physical shape, and seemed like he might be homeless or something. I figured that if he was trying to mug me for my phone, that his only chance would be if he pulled a knife on me, so I made sure to stay a good distance away from the fence, and kept my eyes on where his hands were. So I told him that I didn't catch any of the numbers because he said it too quickly, and he came out with another number this time, and it did have an 07 at the beginning. I entered 7 numbers, and then he started to look around and said, "I can hear it. Come and help me look." He said this as he looked around at the ground, and I was about to say that I hadn't even finished dialing when a much larger black guy appeared from behind a section of the wall to my right. He was also really scruffy looking, and from the look of his eyes, it seemed like he was on drugs. He came out saying that he could hear the phone ringing over towards him and beckoned me to come through a gap in the fence and help look. The white guy then said, "It is ringing, yeah?" And I told him that it was, even though I still hadn't dialed the last digits, and now I was sure that they were trying to lure me to come over to that side of the fence. After 2 or 3 minutes of them beckoning me to come and help them, always insisting that they could hear the ring, I heard the black guy say, "He's not going to fall for it." He said it in a hushed way as if he thought that I wouldn't hear, but with it being out in the middle of nowhere, I could clearly understand what this guy was saying. The white guy then started acting quite aggressive and punched a tree, telling me that he needed the phone badly and how his whole life was on that phone, telling me to come and help him look for it. But while he was punching the tree and ranting, the black guy had taken a few steps away to the right, meaning that I couldn't keep my eyes on both of them at the same time. It was after 5 PM by this point and had gotten dark all of a sudden, which made the whole thing just that much more unsettling. I noticed that there was a gap in the fence where some of the bars had been removed, right where the black guy was heading, and I decided at that point to just get the hell out of there, and I made a run for it. Neither of them said anything as I ran away, which makes me sure that they had malicious intentions. I mean, if they had genuinely lost their phone and needed help, I would expect them to shout, "Where are you going?" or something to try and get me to come back, but they didn't shout anything. After sprinting for a good 20 to 30 seconds, I turned to see if they were chasing me, and they were both stood on the path around where the gap in the fence had been, but they just weren't chasing me. They were just standing there and just watching me run away. I continued running away, but kept looking back every few seconds until I was out of sight. It was at this stage that I got off the canal path and back onto the roads. The person that I spoke to on the phone to report it took my details and the descriptions, but seemed to think that it wasn't anything worth worrying about, but said that it will be investigated. The whole incident has left me a bit unnerved, I'll admit, and I'm pretty sure that I won't be jogging that route any time again. Alone, anyway. Late June, me, 19 female, and my boyfriend, 19 male. We were headed back from a Walmart in his town. We live about an hour apart, and I was visiting. I was driving on somewhat of a back road, and there was a four-way stop. Across from me was what looked like a work truck, parked behind another car and flashing its brights. Nobody else was at the intersection, so I decided to go ahead and just keep on driving. And as soon as I pulled out, a car came speeding, somewhere around 90 miles per hour in a 30 mile per hour zone, from around a corner and almost T-boned my car on the passenger side. Luckily, I sped up and got away, and the car swerved and stopped on the side of the road and flashed its hazards. We were obviously pretty freaked out. Maybe it wasn't the right thing to do as well, but I just kept driving because, well, nobody was hurt, probably just shaken up a bit. So we just kept driving, and my boyfriend was guiding me through the roads, and we were talking about how bizarre it was that we didn't even see or hear the other car. But then I noticed that there's a car behind us. It's probably a good 1,000 feet behind us, so I don't think anything about it. But then it just keeps getting closer and closer. Finally, this car is right on my ass, and once he's on my ass, he turns on an extremely bright light, and it nearly blinds me. We realize that it's the work truck that was across the intersection. I ducked down out of the way of my rear view so I could see the road and keep driving, even speeding up a little. My boyfriend tells me maybe we should pull over, maybe somebody was hurt and they're flagging us down. But we were on a back road with absolutely no light posts and nowhere to pull in that was well lit, so I said absolutely not. Eventually, my boyfriend had to hold the wheel for me because I couldn't see at all. My vision was blurry and spotty. I started to pull into a neighborhood, but the truck started passing me and we almost got into another accident. The neighborhood was dark, of course, and the truck slows down to a stop and backs up so that it's directly behind us, still on the main road while we're parked in this neighborhood. The driver starts shining a flashlight at my car, mostly at me, then goes over to my boyfriend. After it gets to him, the light shuts off and the truck just slowly pulls off and leaves. My boyfriend and I were shaken up, and once I regained my vision, I drove us back to his apartment, wary of the cars around us. We told his dad about it, and he said that it's a good thing that we didn't get out of the car because people get murdered all the time from this stuff. We thought that it was just weird, but thinking back on it, the driver probably saw me and targeted me, and once they realized that there were two people in the car, they didn't want to deal with that, and so they must have left. Which means that they wanted me. At least, it seems like that. What do you guys all think? I have had several creepy encounters in my lifetime that I couldn't explain. However, this one happened tonight, and it just truly boggles my mind. So I was in a grocery store, desperately trying to find the restroom. It was about 10:30 at night, and the store closed 30 minutes after. I finally found it, and I always walk through the restroom at night to make sure that I'm aware of my surroundings. I checked the stores, and all of them were wide open, and to my luck, the bathroom was completely empty. So I thought. I sit down in my store closet to the sinks and the door, and I start doing my thing when, all of a sudden, from the store next to me to my right, I hear a woman say, "Excuse me, do you have the time?" Her voice was very calm and almost sad, I think. Keep in mind, though, that there was no one in this restroom when I checked it, and it was dead silent in there, no pun intended. So I just ignored it and continued peeing. And then, as I was finishing, I heard tapping on the wall, and again heard the voice say, "Excuse me." I was trying to use the bathroom and then leave, but after hearing a voice, I just couldn't ignore that it happened. I did end up ignoring it and pretended like I had headphones in, and I rushed to pull my pants up and just get the hell out of there. It was late at night, and there was hardly any people in the store, so to hear someone at night next to you when you checked every stall, which was all completely empty, was scary to say the least. I thought that it could have been a really sketchy situation too, like maybe somebody was hiding in there or something and waiting for me to get me or something. As I leave my stall, I hear her say once again, "Do you have the time?" I decided to answer her, and I told her that it was 10:30. She replied by saying "thank you," and she just sounded so sad, and her voice was very monotone. I still didn't understand how someone could have entered the bathroom without me noticing or hearing, considering how silent it was in there, and I was alone when I entered. Yet somehow, there was a woman right next to me in the empty stall, without making a single noise prior to talking to me. Just because I was so confused, I decided that I would peek down a little bit to see if I could see her feet. When I did, there was nothing there. No feet, and nothing slightly above that either. The stall was also slightly ajar and wasn't latched closed. And other than a question for the time, I heard absolutely nothing. It was truly dead silent. I proceeded to wash my hands, and after that I just left quickly. Even if that was someone tweaked out, I really didn't want to stick around and find out. Because ghost or not, that honestly scared the hell out of me.
I had a really messed up childhood. My parents divorced when I was really young, and I ended up being traded off every weekend. So, this one time, it was my dad's weekend to have me over, and he was acting super weird the whole day, but I didn't notice it because I was just a kid. And when you're that age, you don't really get adult stuff at all. You just kind of go along for the ride. I remember he had to run errands, so he took me with him. Then he stopped at a friend's house and came back flustered and angry and sped out of the driveway. That was weird enough for me to notice, but things soon got back to normal, and so we carried on running errands until it was dark. We then drive to a rundown motel on a bad side of town from what I can remember and get out of the car. I asked him what we're doing there, and he told me that we were hanging out with some of his friends. I didn't think anything of it, and we went into the motel room. It was a small room with one bed, and my dad's friend was in there alone. They started having drinks and talking. Then I remember my dad's friend giving him like an envelope or something, and then my dad said that he had to go somewhere and that he'd be back soon. Hours went by, and I was alone with that guy, and when I asked when my dad was coming back, he just kept saying, "Soon, don't worry. Your dad will be back to get you soon." Then it got super late and I started to get incredibly tired, so I ended up falling asleep on one of the beds. I want to make it clear that nothing bad happened with that guy, but when I woke up later, he was asleep next to me on the bed. My first thought is kind of anxiety-filled, wondering where my dad is. So I got up and snuck out of the room, then started looking around the motel for my dad. I ended up getting so frightened and sad that I ended up walking up to the motel's reception area and asking the nice lady there to call my dad. She obviously didn't know who I was, so she ended up calling the cops instead. The next thing I know, I'm down at this police station and my mom is coming to pick me up and she's crying too. And after that, we ended up moving away and I never saw my dad again. He'd lost visitation rights because he'd tried to sell me to that guy at the motel. He wasn't a friend of his, but he was someone he arranged to sell me to, half as a way to get money because he was broke and half to get revenge against my mom, I guess. My mom ended up changing her name back to her maiden name, which I use now instead of my dad's last name. I'm thankful that that guy must have had a change of heart in the middle of all of that. I have a regular job nowadays, but I also go to elementary schools across the country as kind of a part of a program that teaches kids when to recognize when something is wrong with their parents and what to do when they realize something is weird and they don't know how to fix it. For a bit of context, I'm a woman. I'm 21 now, so some of the details are a bit hard to recall, but this whole situation had a huge effect on me and was super traumatic. Back in the 7th grade, I had a middle school boyfriend. His name was Kevin. We went to a really small religious school, and being new to a school where everyone grew up together, I felt relieved to have someone I could talk to and sit with at lunch every day. Kevin was my first kiss, and the relationship was pretty innocent except for a few instances that made me feel really uncomfortable. We shared a notebook that we would trade off to each other in between classes to leave cute notes and drawings for one another. One day, I had just finished running the mile for my gym class. I handed him the notebook, and when he gave it back to me later in the day, he had written something about how my pheromones had really turned him on. I had no idea what that meant back then, but still felt somewhat uncomfortable about it. He even tried kind of uncomfortably touching me a few times, and He seemed a little bit off, but was really well liked by my small school, so I just figured it was me overthinking the whole situation. As time went on, the relationship ended, like most middle school relationships do. A while after we had broken up, we still talked on the phone occasionally and remained friends. He began calling my home phone constantly, even in the middle of the night, which annoyed my parents. Eventually, I stopped answering as often, realizing that he was starting to become obsessive. Around the same time, I was lying in bed one night, and around 1 to 2 in the morning, I hear a knock on my window. My blinds were closed and my bedroom was on the second floor, so I was very confused about what I was hearing. The knocking continued and I heard someone saying my name. I had no idea who was on my roof knocking at my window, and I was freaking out. I ran to my parents' room to wake my dad up, saying, "Dad, someone's on our roof and they're knocking on my window." My dad ran outside to catch the person, but didn't see anyone. I went back to bed thinking I was just making things up in my head, but it happened again a few minutes later. My dad went back outside and didn't see anyone. This cycle continued for another 30 minutes until eventually my dad decided to sleep on the floor of my room with me just in case, and I really thought that I was going crazy. A week or so later, the calls from Kevin continued. I answered at one point, and eventually he had told me that he was the person knocking on my window. He said whenever my dad would come outside that he hid behind my chimney. He wanted me to let him into my room and told me that he thought it would be romantic, like Romeo and Juliet. I told my parents and stopped answering the phone entirely. I can't remember how far in between these next few instances happened, but it gradually escalated as more time passed. I avoided him at school and he didn't make much of an effort to talk to me. At some point, I changed schools to go to a public middle school instead. During the beginning of the school year, I was asleep in my bed when my mom pounded on my door, yelling at me to lock my door because someone had broken into our house. I jumped out of bed to lock my door and hid in my bed under my covers, paralyzed with fear and trembling as I strained to hear what was happening outside the bedroom. I could hear my mom scream for my dad to ask if he was okay. Then a few minutes later, she grabbed me and my sisters and locked us in my parents' bedroom. Apparently, my dad had decided to sleep on the couch that night because our dog was acting strange and annoying him. While he was sleeping, my dog started barking and losing his mind. Up until that night, my dog never acted that way, so my dad got up to investigate. He found Kevin leaving our basement and saw that our basement window had been broken. He yelled for my mom and woke her up as he put Kevin in a headlock and she called the police. He broke the basement window with a hammer, took his shoes off and left them on the window ledge, then jumped down from the window, landing on the broken glass. He left bloody footprints all over the carpeted stairs and was headed up with a hammer when my dad found him. I still don't know his intentions that night, but it terrifies me to think about. When the cops arrived, they took him out in handcuffs, and I spied on them as they told my parents that the look in his eyes was the look of someone who would grow up to kill his parents. His eyes were wide and insane looking. It was one of the most terrifying nights of our lives. We later found out that he rode his little sister's bike for several miles in the middle of a storm to get to my house. I was able to get a restraining order against him after that, but he never had to pay to repair the window and only had to do community service. After that, my parents decided to get security cameras for the inside and outside of our house, along with motion lights. A while after the break-in occurred, maybe a month or two after, my neighbor called my parents in the early morning to inform them that he had gone outside and smelled spray paint. When he went to see where the smell was coming from, it didn't take long to realize the entire outside of our house had been vandalized. There was a giant smiley face on our garage door, with something along the lines of, well, I won't repeat it here, but it was very bad stuff written on the side of our house, and random lines and doodles all over the doors and windows. There was also spray paint on the security sticker on the basement window that we just recently repaired. Whoever had done it apparently hidden behind my neighbor's car and also got paint on his car. We checked the security cameras while waiting for the police to arrive and saw footage of someone that was Kevin's height and build spray painting the windows. What's even more terrifying was when we watched the footage from before that. It showed me walking downstairs in my underwear and a t-shirt to get a late-night snack, with who we assumed to be Kevin watching from the window outside. It had rained that night, so despite having the spray paint cans and security footage, the police weren't too positive that they would be able to get fingerprints from the cans, and said the security footage wasn't clear enough to say it was for sure Kevin. I know it was him, but he never got caught, and my family had to pay thousands of dollars to fix the damage he did to our house. The harassment continued for years despite me having a restraining order against him, and by the time I was in high school, he had made countless fake accounts pretending to be me. He posted very embarrassing things and followed everyone at my new school. I constantly dealt with people asking if the accounts were me, which turned into bullying and even more harassment. I would get messages of him saying, "I know where you are, I'm watching you," and threats of him saying that he was going to kill me. This went on for another year until we finally stopped. He later ran an anti-bullying campaign and never had to face the consequences of his actions. He put me through torture. I can't even begin to express how terrifying those years of my life were. At the beginning, it was too much to handle, and I ended up in a mental hospital after a mental breakdown. I wish I could say I've healed from that time of my life all these years later, but I still struggle with the aftermath of the trauma he caused me. I have panic attacks when I get message requests. I keep my blinds shut and doors locked at all times, and any knocking noises on my windows causes my heart to jump. I'm so upset that he gets to live his life and not deal with the aftermath of what he did to me and my entire family. What's worse is people from my old school loved him and still do despite knowing what he did. One person messaged me years ago and said I was lying, and even if it was true, it was my fault. Seeing the love that he still receives despite acting the way he did fills me with so much anger. I'm just hoping that writing about this and telling this story helps me to continue to heal. This all started when I was 14 when my mom met her new boyfriend, who I'll call Ray. I remember the first time he met me and my siblings, he looked at my mom and said, "Oh wow, didn't know you had a gang." Which, looking back on, was a very weird thing for him to say, since he had been on a few dates with my mom before and she had told him exactly how many kids she'd had. Ray seemed like a normal guy at first. He was in his 40s and had 2 older sons from his last marriage who would sometimes come over for dinner, but things went wrong after he moved in. He would yell a lot and have loud arguments with my mom and throw things at her. He would always sweet-talk his way around her afterwards, and this was probably why she didn't leave him sooner. My mom was crazy young when she had us, and she's always been a bit immature for her age, so I think it made it easier for him to manipulate. But Ray found it difficult to get along with my siblings and me. He would complain about every little thing we did wrong and quickly became very controlling. But whenever we complained about how he was acting to our mom, he would accuse us of trying to ruin their relationship. This worked pretty much every time since it would cause her to get angry and yell at us instead of him. As we got older, he stopped us from seeing friends he didn't like and wouldn't allow any friends to come over unless they had his approval first. I realized he was crazy when he picked me up from school one day, which he never did, and while driving home, he accused my sister and me of trash-talking him behind his back. When I asked him how he would even know that, he told me that he had proof. When we got home, he showed me a tape recorder and played back a recording of my sister and me complaining about him in our bedroom at night. I asked him why in God's name he put recorders in our bedroom for, and we had a big argument. I immediately called my mom and told her, but later found out from her that she never actually said anything about it to him. I made him remove all the tape recorders from our bedroom, but I'm convinced that he kept on hiding them since he would sometimes bring up conversations that my sister and I had while he wasn't around. We were so paranoid that we would whisper, and we never talked about anything private in case he somehow overheard. We were so terrified that he also hid cameras as well as tape recorders, and we would dress and undress super quickly so there weren't any cameras and he wouldn't be able to see anything. and it gets me angry thinking about the fear we lived in while living there. When I was 16, I got a job at a fast food place, and Ray had a big problem with that as well. His reasoning for this was that my boyfriend at the time worked there, and he believed that I was just going there to mess around with my boyfriend. So his way of checking on me was to come and sit in the parking lot and record me. He did this for a whole month. He would show me the recordings after, which would just lead to even more arguments, ending with 16-year-old me begging a 40-plus-year-old man to not stalk me at work. I was pretty much done at that point and moved in with my dad, who had just moved back from New Zealand. My dad was livid when I told him about everything that had happened, and he wanted to call the cops on Ray, but my mom begged him not to. Thankfully, they broke up a few years later over something completely unrelated. For some background, I worked as a cop for several years before becoming a ranger. I've been a ranger in a large U.S. national park for a while now and have some things I'll never forget. Creepy things and things that show the brutality and hatred humans are capable of. I was on night shift, and I patrolled the park looking for any type of illegal activity, like drug use, people selling themselves, poaching. I got a call for a man looking into a cabin where a summer camp was going on. So, great. Some creep probably just touching himself to you-know-what. Very, very weird, but I blacked out. No headlights or sirens, parked a little ways down and walked in hopes of catching the guy. And I kid you not, homie was just looking into windows. I start my approach and flick my flashlight and told him not to move and show me his hands. He turns around, looks at me, and starts saying he's sorry. I put him in handcuffs and detained him while I searched him and waited for backup. I found his ID, a knife, and some miscellaneous things. I put him into another officer's vehicle while I made contact with the counselors. They stated they had seen him earlier in the day but thought nothing of it. After taking statements, I run his name. As you can guess, he is a registered offender. I opened the door to talk to him, and not my proudest moment, but I was tired. He was looking at little kids, and I said, "What do you think you're doing, you sick freak?" He looked me in the eyes, no reaction, and said in a cold, monotone voice, "I was able to smell them. They're ready to breed, officer." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just closed the door. I stayed on scene for the rest of the night to ease everyone's mind and act as a deterrent. Obviously, he ended up being charged. Thinking about what he said and the way he said it, it still makes me feel sick. He's now banned and, I believe, still in prison, where I believe creeps like him should stay forever. He ruined a great outdoor experience and may have scared these poor kids from camping, hiking, fishing, or hunting, and just enjoying the outdoors of life. I could go on and on about the awful people and stuff I've heard and seen and responded to, but cases involving children are just the worst in all the ways. So in the years of the 1960s, my grandfather was a hospital porter. His work usually entailed daily chores such as moving patients from room to room, delivering medical supplies, shifting deceased patients to the morgue, and taking out the rubbish and waste. During my grandfather's time at the hospital, he made a collection of videos with his work colleagues where they would all be doing goofy activities. One such video had him going to one of the many barrels full of thrown-out hospital food, grabbing a scoop and then delivering it to his colleague who was sat at a chair and table in an alleyway, pretending to be a diner at a high-end restaurant. He told the reason for that video is because they were all angry at the amount of food waste left over by the hospital. Apparently, it was perfectly good food, too. I will add here that the videos I've seen have never had any sound to them and have all been a grainy black and white, but I believe that video cameras were only just being made back then. I don't know the history too well. Nothing ever seemed to bother my grandfather. His videos showed him being mischievous and playful with the other porters until one day. Back then, hospitals contained a ward where people were severely mentally ill and they would be housed there. I'm not sure if they were there their entire lives or if it was just temporary until they could be moved elsewhere. But for some reason, the hospital had put this ward on the highest floor, and this is the stage where my grandfather's nightmarish encounter started. While he was doing his usual rounds, a woman from the ward had gotten free and wandered over to an open window. It was then that she decided to jump to her death. My grandfather had gotten the call to go and collect the remains. I don't believe the police investigated the incident as it was just seen as a hospital mishap, but I could be wrong as he had never really mentioned the police. He walked around the grounds where her body lay with a stretcher, and with his partners, they helped lift the remains. But as he did so, what was left of the woman's flattened head fell into his arms and separated from her body. The way he tells it, her head was like a pancake. She must have just gone down head first. I can only imagine the ground must have been concrete, but again, he never gave specifics. Since that moment, my grandfather found that he couldn't walk around that section of the hospital, and flashbacks of her head in his arms would haunt him for a very long time. Growing up, my school was about 5 kilometers from home. I had to walk it because my parents would work until 7 p.m. every day. The walk would go through a huge forest. I can probably count the number of times I encountered anyone through the forest on one hand. This specific time has always stuck in my head, and looking back, I think I may have seen a kidnapping, or some children trying to escape a kidnapping. I was 12. It was late spring and very hot outside. I was on my way home and had probably been walking for maybe 1 or 2 kilometers when I noticed a group of boys walking my way. The boys had no clothes on at all and were carrying what looked to me like a bat, the animal, not the sports equipment. There were 3 of them. 2 were around the same age as me and 1 looked a little younger. They looked flushed and sweaty as if though they had been running or walking for a while. They were almost dragging the younger boy along as he seemed like he needed to rest. I just froze and looked at them confused. They were speaking a language I didn't understand, and I can speak both Spanish and English, so it was neither of them. The 2 older boys had olive skin with dark hair, while the younger one was more pale and blonde. One of the older boys tried to talk to me, but as I said, I couldn't understand whatever language they were speaking. I said to him in both Spanish and English, "I can't understand you," and he seemed confused, but he didn't waste any time. He pointed at the big 1-liter water bottle I had in my backpack's side pocket and shook his fist by his chest as if he was begging me. I gave him the bottle and he made sure the younger boy drank first. They finished off the water I had left in there and nodded their heads as if to say thank you before carrying on their way they were going. I kept on walking home, but I felt creeped out by whatever I had just witnessed. After another kilometer or 2, I saw a man. He was tall and thin and looked to be in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. He was pale, but pale in a way that he looked ill or sick. Looking back, I think he may have been on something, but that didn't click for me at the time. When I saw him, I tried to keep my head down and keep walking, but he stopped me. And in broken Spanish, he said to me that he was looking for his little brothers. They were lost and asked if I had seen them. I just shook my head. He said gracias and carried on walking. I tried my hardest to walk normally, but as soon as he was out of sight, I ran, and I didn't stop until I reached my home. Once my parents got home, I told them what had happened, and they just shrugged it off and told me I shouldn't worry. When I insisted that I was serious, my dad promised that he would call the police in the morning and tell them what I had seen. If my dad did call them, I was never called in for further questioning. No police asked me for descriptions or anything. My dad swears he reported it, but I have doubts. I just wish that they would have taken me seriously. This happened almost 10 years ago, but it still gives me creeps whenever I think about it. I was finishing college, living back with my parents in our sleepy little town, and had rekindled an old friendship from high school to pass my days. Madison was a chill girl, and I got along pretty well with her boyfriend and brothers, so I ended up spending a fair amount of time over at her place. Madison's mom was a nurse who enjoyed training for marathons, so when she wasn't at work, she was usually out running. Her dad, on the other hand, was off on disability and home every day, except for delivering the paper around the neighborhood at about 4 a.m. Through passing conversations with Madison, I learned that he had been a professor before going off work, but I didn't feel it was my place to inquire any further than that. He was never anything but pleasant to me during our interactions, but I was always struck with the notion that he seemed very distracted by something, as if there was always another conversation happening that he needed to return to. My parents are the type who always have questions about my friends, even if I was a 22-year-old college student, so I filled them in on what I knew and where I'd been spending my afternoons. My mom asked me if I knew what her dad was off on disability for. I told her I did not, at which point my dad piped up and said that he believes he deals with some type of mental illness. He then gently explained that he had responded to a 911 call with the volunteer fire department to go retrieve Madison's father out of their garage after failing to take his own life. My heart went out to everyone involved, and my questions surrounding her dad were satisfied at that point. I continued hanging around Madison and her family for the rest of the summer, never having any issues beside a hangover the next day. One night, we were all over at Madison's house celebrating someone's birthday, I think. Everyone was congregating in the kitchen, sharing snacks, drinking wine, dancing. Even Madison's parents were down and having a good time with us. Her dad came over to me calmly with his drink and asked if he could speak to me in the other room just off of the kitchen. I agreed and followed him, thinking he was probably going to ask me to move my car. When we got into the other room, I could see the concerned look on his face and became a little worried, hoping I hadn't done something wrong. "Amanda, I don't mean to scare you, but my paper route is through your neighborhood, and I saw something the other night. While I was heading down your street, I noticed a man coming towards me on the other side of the road. I don't usually see anybody else out that early, so I was a little surprised, but as he got closer, I noticed that he had no feet." He made eye contact with me as he said the last part, and I could tell that he was being serious. I had no idea what to do, and I just froze, and he just floated on past. He said with a dramatic arm wave. He then began to shake his head as if saying, "No. Anyways, it's a Reaper, and I thought you should know." And they made further eye contact again, but smiled sweetly. I picked my jaw up off the floor and managed to thank him for letting me know. He nodded dutifully, and we went back into the other room, rejoining the party. I told Madison about it later on in the evening, just so she would know what was going on with her dad. She seemed embarrassed, but not surprised by this information, and told me to ignore her dad because, as she put it, he was crazy. Her dad carried on as usual around me after that and never brought it up to me again. After I finished college and moved out, Madison and I sort of lost touch. I don't really think about her that often. I do, however, always check to make sure people have feet when I'm out walking in the early morning hours. I'm a 24-year-old female living with my roommate, a 23-year-old female, in an apartment in the suburbs of Atlanta. As you may know, Atlanta is super dangerous and crime-riddled right now, so we have a Ring peephole camera, perfect for apartments, and a digital lock on our door for safety. And about 3 months ago, the sweet family across the hall moved out and we got a new neighbor. His name is David, and let's just say that he's interesting. When we first saw him moving in, we were a bit taken aback by the sheer amount of stuff that he was trying to fit into his one-bedroom apartment. All of it was anime merch and Star Wars memorabilia. Definitely gives me sort of hoarder vibes, but it's none of my business. When the moving trucks left and a few days had passed, my roommate and I knocked on his door to give him a welcome to the neighborhood gift basket with some baked goods dog treats and poop bags for his dog and seasonal candles. Apparently, this was not the correct thing to do. After that day, David got creepy. It started out innocent enough. He would come to the door whenever he heard me or my roommate coming or going to have a quick chat, and he would come over regularly to ask for salt or sugar or toilet paper. Sometimes he would ask if we would come over and watch his dog. But within the past 2 weeks, things have really escalated. 2 weekends ago, we were out pretty late partying at the bars near the Brave Stadium. We ended up getting home at around 3 a.m., only to find David sitting at the top of the stairs waiting for us. He acted all upset, asked us where we'd been, and requested that we tell him if we were planning to be out past midnight. I just laughed in his face, and he called me a mindless Stacy. Still not sure what that means. He also asked for access to our Ring camera so he could make sure we were safe. We laughed at him again and just went into our apartment. Now here's the scary part. We checked the Ring the next morning, and he sat outside his apartment staring at our door for the rest of the night. When we saw that, we contacted the complex to let them know that he was starting to act crazy. They told us to contact the police, so we did. The police told us to contact them if he made any threats, but since we lived in a shared space, they couldn't do anything until he entered our apartment or threatened us. I assume the complex said something to him because he left us alone for the next 5 days or so. This week, he's out of control. He's constantly sitting outside our apartment. My roommate has started leaving for work an hour earlier so that she doesn't cross paths with him. I cannot leave the apartment during the day because he is constantly waiting outside for me. He's asked me out, left love letters on our door, on our cars, and in our mailbox. I told him once that I wasn't interested, and he told me that he would take his own life if I didn't go on a date with him. Of course, I don't have that in writing, so the police won't do anything about it. He has also put up a Ring doorbell of his own so he can track all of our movements and will leave really creepy notes when we're gone so we find them when we come back. I'm really scared. What do you guys think we should do? I was in 7th grade. Didn't have much friends because I used to hang out with high school kids. I was pretty alone at school because I never liked anyone in my class. That year, a new teacher came and he was about 55 or 56 years old. Always bragged about being rich, how he used to be a military pilot, and so on. When someone asked him, "If you're so rich, why are you a teacher?" To which he replied, "Because I love children." No one thought of that as creepy at the time. I mean, a lot of people genuinely love kids in a non-weird way. However, he was always extremely touchy with some students. He would give better grades to some girls, only a few, and including me. I never let him get near me though, but he would hold my hand and sometimes pat my head. The thing is, his relationship with me was different, and I guess I could feel it. I had no one to talk to in my class, and he took the advantage of me being alone. He would shower me with compliments, tell me how I'm the prettiest in the class, say I'm special. He even decided to talk to my mom about how much she likes me. At some point, it started to get really weird, and a girl, a lesbian by the way, in my class started to hang out with me. He didn't like that. He would gossip to other students to get us away from each other. Just some weird stuff, and he also decided to give both of us bad grades and didn't want to teach us, so he basically refused to ever help us. That girl and I became good friends, and one day she said, I wish he doesn't come to class tomorrow. That's honestly my birthday wish." And I laughed and agreed. The next morning, we sit in the classroom, and suddenly the principal and some other teachers came to tell us that that teacher died yesterday due to a heart attack. I still think about this and how strange it was. By the way, his wife was like 20 years younger. Three or 4 days ago, my wife and I were sound asleep in our bedroom. Around 2:45 a.m., our German Shepherd Duke started barking viciously. We never heard him bark like this before, so we assumed something was amiss. I got up to check and see if something was up and ended up spilling a water on my nightstand. It took me 2 to 3 minutes to clean up the water, and I figured maybe Duke was simply barking at the rain. I went back to sleep, and a few minutes later, Duke starts again with the vicious bark. My wife starts freaking out and turns our lamp on. We sat in bed for a second, kind of spooked, and then we heard someone trying our front door. We heard the screen door clicking into place after being shut. The front door is locked, so he had no way to get in. At this point, I'm freaked out, and so is my wife. From our bedroom, we can see a window into our kitchen that leads out front. My wife starts staring at it intensely and tells me she can see a shadow moving back and forth. She said it was a dark silhouette walking up and down our front sidewalk. At this point, I'm getting scared, and when I get scared, I get angry. I get up and turn on our kitchen light in hopes of spooking the stranger outside. You would think he would leave with our dog barking and lights turning on. At this point, I didn't know what to do and made a stupid mistake. I went to my garage and opened the garage door. I then realized that I wasn't wearing shoes and went to my living room to put them on. I wanted to go outside, find the disturbance, and deal with it. Duke was with me the whole time, and when he suddenly turned and started running towards the door that connects to the garage, I knew I'd messed up. I turned and looked, and this dude was just standing in my kitchen with mud on his face. The dude smelled like feces. He was wearing relatively decent clothes and didn't appear to be homeless or anything like that. I live in the heart of a really nice part of town as well. As I started approaching him, it looked like he was trying to take his jacket and shoes off. It was very bizarre. I yelled at him to get the F out of my house, while Duke was jumping and growling and barking at the guy. He took a step back and said something incomprehensible. I yelled again that it's 3 a.m. to get the F out of my house, and I shoved him. He sort of stumbled and made his way out of the house into the garage and just left. I shut the garage door and immediately called the cops. The cops came and said that there were a couple of meth heads in the area known to do things like this, except they didn't seem to fit the description of the guy I described. I haven't been able to sleep for a few days now. I don't know what this guy was after. Best case scenario, he was just incredibly messed up and had no idea what he was doing. Maybe he thought it was his house since he started taking his shoes and jacket off. From the door leading from the garage and into the house, there's a glass. Where I was standing, he couldn't see me, but he could see my wife. Is it possible he saw her alone and thought maybe she was by herself and came in? The guy wasn't aggressive towards me, but he also wasn't bigger than me, as I'm 6'2", 210 pounds. And before y'all say it, I know I shouldn't have opened the garage. He obviously took it as an open invitation, and I felt guilty about it since the time it happened. I figured dogs barking, lights on, garage opening, a normal burglar would just scram. My wife and I are incredibly lucky he wasn't armed or couldn't do anything violent towards us. This guy, who we'll call Jimmy, and I met in high school some years back. I met him through my now ex-boyfriend, and we hung out a lot during class. Never just the two of us, though. He was really funny and a charming guy, so it felt good to be around him and just chilling and laughing all the time. Little did I know who he really was under that facade. About a year goes by after we graduated high school, and we hadn't really talked or seen each other since. Randomly, he started sending me DMs on Instagram, and we got back in touch again. He had a girlfriend during this time, yet he kept flirting and saying really uncomfortable things towards me. One day, he even sent me lewd images that I'd never asked for, which made me feel really disgusted and upset. On that same day, his then girlfriend sent me a DM asking if he was doing these things, and I of course said yes. She then went on to make a group chat for the three of us where she roasted him into oblivion. He literally just continued sending these explicit images in the group chat, which was really messed up, at which point I finally lost my temper and just stopped talking to him completely for a while. Then, About a year after this whole debacle, I let him back into my life again. Yes, I know that was a stupid move on my part, but I'm the type of person who forgives easily because I see only the good in most people. We talked for a few days, then realized that we kind of had a crush on each other for a long time. And this is when he started asking if I wanted to hang out at his place, just the two of us, which had never really happened before. He admittedly gave me butterflies, so I said I'd think about it just to be coy, when really I was planning on hanging out with him soon. But that very quickly changed moments later. One of my very good friends, Diane, asked me if I was friends with Jimmy. I said, "Yeah, I am. Why do you ask?" She then goes on to tell me that Jimmy is a child predator. Instantly, I'm like, "What?" Laughing. I was obviously really confused, considering for the most part he's always been such a good guy. Sure, he has some weird moments, but he was cool to hang around with. Then, Diane showed me the evidence. And I mean, there was a lot of evidence. Apparently, a whole group of underage girls had gotten together and shared their experiences with Jimmy in a group chat, which included Diane because she had a family connection to one of the girls. Thank God there was no physical assault experiences, but there were an incredible amount of texts. So many god-awful and disgusting texts. He was saying these terrible things to these girls, and that's only the least messed up things he said to most of them, and I can't go into most of the stuff. And one of these girls was actually as young as 11 years old. After I saw all the evidence, I began having a massive panic attack. This guy who I had been so close to, who I almost was in a relationship with, turned out to be a repeated offender. It made me sick to my stomach and still makes me feel like puking to this day. I actually had felt things for this absolute monster. I also found out that he had been on house arrest for some sort of crime at some point and didn't even tell me. I don't want to think of what crime he may have committed, but I didn't even want to know. All I knew was I wanted this guy completely out of my life, so I told him he was disgusting and blocked him. And I haven't heard from him since and hopefully never will again. I don't want to know what could have happened to me if we had met up alone in his house. I feel like I definitely wouldn't have been safe. I, a 28-year-old female, was sitting by my front door smoking a cigarette and watching a video on my phone. It's not uncommon to see a rabbit hop across the walkway to my house, so when I heard a noise coming from my right, that's what I thought it would be. Turning to look, I was surprised to see part of a leg and a shoe stepping off my walkway towards my garage. I stood up and called out, "Hello?" a couple of times with no response. Opening the door, I got inside and locked it behind me. Immediately, I head upstairs to go look through a window for a clearer perspective, and there's no one that I can see. The reason I find this unsettling is that the other day, a man seemingly came from the side of my house and was cutting across the front lawn. The guy was wearing sunglasses, a ball cap, and a big jacket. When he noticed me standing by the door, he pulled the jacket up to his face like he was trying to hide it. He then proceeded to do a jog out of sight. It was odd enough that I actually told my family, and they seemed to agree it was strange but thought maybe he was embarrassed that I had seen him. Honestly, I'm not sure what's going on, but it definitely creeped me out. I might just be on edge as this happened around 10 p.m. tonight. This is probably silly to post, but it makes me feel a bit better to have it written down. I'm a 33-year-old female living with my boyfriend, a 42-year-old male, in a small fourplex in a very small town. I work at 6 a.m. and wake up at 4:30. About 2 weeks ago during my morning routine, I noticed someone standing behind a dumpster 20 feet away. I know my apartment is the only one with lights on, and he's looking at my window just watching for about 5 minutes when I notice a dog with the man, and I just wrote it off. Until today, that is. This morning, I left for work as usual, stepped out the main door and scanned the area. All clear. I walk the 10 feet to my car, buckle up and start my music. I back out of my spot, and when I shift to drive, Suddenly I see a man with a bucket on his head standing at the end of the walkway within 3 feet of my car. We made eye contact and he pulled the bucket off his head and stepped toward me. I just panicked and floored it before he got closer. I'm honestly terrified. I even told my boss that if I didn't show up or call that I was in trouble. And I feel so scared. And I will be carrying a can of wasp spray in my car every morning at least until the pepper spray I ordered arrives. Police and landlords have been contacted as well as the neighbors. I just have no idea what that guy was on. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to